Hey guys, welcome to the Casey Catch Up. I've got Oskar and Edo. I thought we'd try to get the podium together from Molokai to Oahu and basically just froth out and sort of discuss what our perspective was of the race. So thanks Oskar and Edo for being part of the race, been part of this, but also part of the battle that was Molokai to Oahu. It was I feel like it was a really good finish to downwind month. So yeah, thanks boys.
Yeah, it's a good finish for you, mate. No, it was a man. That was a battle out there. That was such a good event, and I think the whole time having a few races stacked up like that, everyone was in town. Everyone were getting runs in together. It was such a good time just to be. I mean, it was my first trip to Hawaii too, so just having and all these guys. Like none of us, I guess, the last few years have been. You know, I've never raced before, but I mean, a lot of these guys that we'd kind of seen, you, Kane, none of us had raced each other. So kind of all be in the same place for a stretch of time for a few races was pretty epic.
Yeah, it was awesome.
Yeah, and like the way the sport's developing, I feel like there's so many different techniques that everyone's using, and it was cool to like see people from different places and like see how their technique and their strategies worked in the race,
Yeah, for sure, because there was a pretty clear, like, let's dive into it. So Molokai to Oahu, there was kind of a race of, I'd say, 4 sections. There was the start, which was like flat. And then there was this like 15 to maybe 20 kilometer section. It was pretty nice, but sort of rolly bumps. And then there was Makapu Shelf to the wall, which was sort of messier. And then there was the wall to the finish, which was kind of messed up.
Yeah. Oh, that was hard.
Yeah. So Edo, you go, Oskar.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think the gear tuning, like what Edo was saying, was definitely, I reckon it was a little geographic. Like the Hawaiian boys, I know you coming out, you, me, even like Perth, Kui, somewhat ended up on the same-ish size boards. Like we're probably on the shorter end, like high 6s, low 7s in that kind of realm. And I mean, when I first got to Oahu, I caught up with Simeon doing some paddle ups, and they're on 9-footers by 9x16 barracudas. And that was kind of the first time I was like, oh, like the Hawaiian boys that going at this a different approach to us. They're just like boards that are super fast, and I assume they're going to be paddling up small foils and planning on a paddle finish. So
yeah,
I think Edo, you did the same, did you? You went a longer board.
Yeah, I had an 8.6. Yeah. And it was like 125 liters, I think. So yeah, it was a pretty big thing. Yeah.
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 How much do you weigh?
I'm around 80 kilos.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
It's definitely a really big board.
But still, like Edo, you and I are probably the heaviest in the top 5 to 10, maybe even, because Oscar's lightweight.
Yeah, I'm down around 70 at the moment, I think. But Andrew's bigger. Mid-80s?
Yeah.
Kane as well. I think he's a bigger guy.
Yeah. It was interesting because a lot of people going into like with the coaching, a lot of people complain, oh, I'm heavier. It makes it way harder. And I think there is that. But I think if you're powerful and heavy, you can make it work. It's really a power to weight sport. But the start, interesting. So Oskar, what length board were you on?
So I sized up, which still was nowhere near what the Hawaiian boys were on, but I went with a 7.7. I think around 100 liters.
Mm-hmm.
I brought with me a 7.0, which was, I think it's 85 liters. That's the longest I've ever ridden and I ever really planned on riding.
Yeah.
And I could still flat water start the foil I rode comfortably. But the main thing was that finish. Like if it was going to be a windy day, you're going to be paddling, like realistically. Yeah. So I kind of felt once I actually tried the 7.7, I was kind of surprised on foil. It actually felt good. The length didn't make too much of a difference, but the paddle on it was just so much easier. And it's the same, catching bumps was easier. Flat water start was easier. So it was a pretty easy decision to go that big, but I still went nowhere near what you got, Edo. So
Yeah, so interesting. And then I guess from my perspective, the start was a bunch of people got up first paddle up, and then people just sort of dropped off. Like Oskar, you and I were like pretty much you, Oskar, and Andrew. So it was
Yeah.
And then Edo, I didn't know where you were at the start. So what happened?
Yeah, I had a shocker in the start. So it was like my biggest worry overall, just because I was riding a really small wing. So yeah, I just decided to ride that wing because I pretty much always trained on it, and I figured if I can ride that wing in pretty like glassy conditions, then I can ride it when it's flat in Molokai, right? But it's really different riding it in conditions where you have a little bit of bumps, like open ocean and it's glassy, than actually flat water starting and having to pump out when there's like nothing to work with, you know?
Yeah.
So yeah, I was more worried about getting the board up on time and not having like all the boat wakes and things like that. But I ended up having a perfect start. And then I was pumping out and I was like, wait a minute, like I'm actually getting really tired. Like this is where's the wind line right now? I need the wind line. But I didn't make it to the wind line and I went down, and it was the worst thing ever because like I was completely gassed out. And I feel like you need a lot of energy to paddle up. You need all your energy to sprint, paddle up, and I didn't have any. So I was like, I remember trying to get up too quick and I couldn't. So I ended up just sitting on my board and like not praying, but I was just like in my head, like I was like trying to breathe because it was just a horrible moment watching everyone just fly past me and all the escort boats. And I'm just looking at everyone leaving and I'm like, wow, I really messed up. Like I should have just ridden a bigger wing. I thought it was the end of the race, but yeah, I ended up kind of like resting on the board and paddling back up. And I remember my escort boat telling me at the finish, he's like, bro, you were down for 13 minutes. And I was like, that felt like 1 or 2 minutes to me. But yeah, it was a really tough time. But then again, it's different because when we got to the bumps, you guys were probably on liftier wings and I was on a smaller wing. So I was just going so much faster.
Yeah.
In the bumps.
Yeah. And that was the chess match. That is Molokai to Oahu, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
So, Oskar, I think for me, it was like you and I seemed to be on a pretty similar size foil for our weight anyway. Just like the way we were at the start, we were more or less on the same line, and you were a bit further north, I was a bit further south, and but those first few bumps were just pumping basically, and I felt at the time the adrenaline, and I felt like I was good, but like I felt it later in the race for sure. How did you feel with that, like that start?
Oh, 100%. And I think it was hard. I think when we got up on the start, I only had there was 4 of us really at the front inside anyway. So I think Kai was on my right and he got up really quick. And then I think you must have been a little further left and you kind of moved in with us.
Yeah.
Yeah. And same Andrew came into the picture and the sort of all 4 of us going for a few minutes. And I mean, you know, a flat water start rips. It takes so much energy to get it out, but then you've got to start pumping the thing and you've got to somehow get your heart rate down a little, which is interesting. And I think Kai, he started struggling. Like I saw him maybe we're 2 to 3 minutes in and he just started dropping lower and lower and like the board started touching and he was kind of done. And that was at the time I was the same, like the adrenaline was firing. I was like, oh, Lenny just dropped. I was like, I'm feeling good. I was like, we're on. And I think, maybe 5 minutes in, the wing boats kind of really, like you started getting the wash from them run across.
Yeah.
And that got a little, like I was just trying, like when it was smooth water at the start, you could stay high. It felt pretty comfortable. But then once the wash started coming, it started getting a little funky. And I think they probably, look, whether they called the boats in too early or not, I don't know. Like I look back where Kai had fallen, you could see the wash from the wing boats going across. And not long after that, our boats came in.
Yeah.
So like for him to then start with that amount of wash going through it, it would have been an absolute nightmare. So I think staying out in front of when they released the boats was key for whoever stayed out. So I think it was at that stage, you, me and Andrew was the only 3 that I was aware of. But
yeah, likewise. On the boats, I had like a bit of a, I don't know, I was pumping along and I spoke to you after, Oskar, but I like had like this real, like this, the adrenaline and the race. And when the boats came in, your boat like slotted in because I was like, you were here and I was here. And then your boat slotted in right in front of me. And at first I'm like, oh, this is good. because I could just like, I was literally riding the boat wash, and I'm like, I can rest the legs a touch. And then I was like annoyed because the boat prevented me from pumping, because the boat was going slower than what we could pump. So I was like, and then and I thought they were filming me, because I'm like, oh, they're gonna think I'm like trying to rest. It looks like someone on your boat was filming, and I'm like, get out of the way, like move your boat. Like, it was like full fired up, and I'm like, and looking back, I'm like, you're an idiot. But it was just like the adrenaline of the race, and like Andrew was here and you were there, and I'm like, Andrew and I were both just stuck in your wash, and it was I just I think I was worried that I was going to get like disqualified or something. I didn't know what the rules were like for riding boat wash, but it was also like, then I realized, hang on, this boat isn't even helping. It's like, get out of the way. Like, I want to try to like catch up to Oskar, and it made zero difference, because as we all know, that start almost meant nothing. But at the time, I just like, this like rage came over me. I'm like, whoa. And afterwards, I'm like, why did I get so angry about that? But it was.
But I also think, even if you maybe got to ride some wake, you lose a lot on, like, it's so like you've got wind coming the other way and wind bumps coming across it. You're trying to sit on a boat wake that you're then kind of going over these like speed bumps with other bumps coming. Like, removing that is almost easier than what you gain in trying to ride it. Like, it's pretty stressful to stay high and try and suck as much energy out of that bump as you can, but then add in a cross wake and like, you just rather not be there almost.
Actually, on the start, how did you guys find, so before the boats came in, so there was the flat, and then the wind sort of started coming across, and I was my strategy was to be a little bit south of the run line, but at the start, the wind, the way it was blowing, I found it was easiest for me, being natural foot and forehand, that like the right was really easy to sort of was easier to slot into the bumps, whereas the left felt like I was kind of like having to pump more. And my boat captain was yelling at me, I guess it's just as the boats, he's like, you got to go south, you got to go south. I'm like, you don't understand. It's so much easier to surf this way right than it is to like sort of go with the wind. And he's like, stop going north. And how did you guys find that? Was that same for you guys, or?
Yeah, I think so. Just because the bumps were so close together and moving, like, since they're just little ripples, if you go down with them, you're outrunning them and you're just doing up and overs, you're like, you're not getting the energy. But if you go side, I feel like you can ride them for just a little bit longer. I feel like that helped a lot. Yeah. Going side for me, at least, was.
Yeah.
I think even looking at the track, like we ran, if you look at that kind of straight line that most guys took, we moved pretty north of it at the start. And I think we are all ultimately riding way higher aspect, fast foils, which if you turned with those bumps, like you see, you just outrun them. You just do up and over. So you had to cut quite a hard line along them to stay on foil. Yeah. So we ended up going quite far north off the start.
Yeah. And then what do you guys reckon? Like 3, maybe 4 kilometers in, the bumps sort of started to get like not having to pump, maybe. Like it sort of felt like it
was a while. Like I reckon it was like 15 minutes before it really started. Yeah. And I think that was when Andrew came up. Andrew was on my left at that stage. And he came up and he's like, we'd just gotten kind of a couple good rides, and he's like, we've fucking done it. We're out. And I was just like, he's like, who else is here? And I was like, Jimmy's here. I was like, is anyone else? Like, no one wanted to look back. Because you look back, he just was like, I've made it this far. I'm not risking turning around and looking. So I was like, I know Jimmy's here. It's you and me. I'm like, Kai dropped and I couldn't see him get back up. So I was like, it's just us. And like, we kind of just frothed out. Like, yeah, we did it. And then Andrew just kind of like looks, he's like, now it's on. And it was just like, it was just kind of like, it was a moment of like sick. And then I was like, all right, now like back to it. Like, let's go.
Yeah. It was,
I think that's like the biggest success, just using this, like the smallest swing you can to make it to the wind line. And then once you're there, you're just on, like, you're just going to be going fast from there.
I think that was the gamble everyone. I think that was the gamble that everyone played. Like Kai's done it in the past where he's won, where he paddled to the wind line, but then he was on a small, faster foil and flew through the channel. So, and it's tricky. Like it's, I think a lot of guys gas themselves. Like you said, yourself waiting 13 minutes after that. Like, that the flip side, which we were talking about the other day, was other guys just paddled out like fairly cruisy until they knew they could make it from there onwards. But they weren't gassed. Whereas if you gassed it off the start line but didn't make it out, a lot of guys were kind of, I was talking to Eric Sternman before, and he's like, I'm thinking of doing it in like 2 to 3 segments. But like you said, you gas yourself that much. It takes 5 minutes to even remotely get to a point where you can go again.
Yeah.
So is it worth then, gassing yourself and then waiting so long to recover, or just paddle it cruisy and then, or not cruisy, but sustainably and then go once you think you're good. So
it was the full
I'm sure there's
hair
going to
and
be
the tortoise
next year.
Yeah, it was. I know Josh Koo. He didn't even try to paddle up. He said he paddled for 2, maybe 3 Ks, and then he's like, I guess I should try now. And I'm like, what? How did you even give it a crack? And he said that he actually, after I spoke to him, he said he regretted not trying earlier to paddle up, because he just literally just was cruising. He's like, I can't paddle up in this. Just kept sort of going, and it was interesting because it was that start was gnarly, and I think it actually caught a few people who'd done it before by surprise, I guess, thinking Kai and Jeffrey, because in 2018 and 2019, when they'd both done it before, it was actually a fair bit windier and a bit more northeast, which means you get a little bit more wind wrapping around Molokai, and because it was so east and a little bit lighter, the wind shadow or the bumps, that just took longer for the fetch to build up. So I'm hoping that's tougher than what it normally is, because if it's like that again next year, it's going to be here we go. So it was interesting to see and hear, because at the start, I honestly thought when everyone got up at the start, I thought, okay, we're on, everyone's up, let's go. And then, like you said, then my boat captain goes, oh, it's just you, Oskar and Andrew. And I'm like, what happened to everyone else? I'm like, I guess that was pretty hard. Yeah. So
I rewatched someone posted a video of the start line, and I didn't realize so many guys got up.
Yeah.
Same thing. You can't really look back. You can't afford to look back. So whoever's in your peripherals is who you knows up.
Yeah.
And it just seemed like, guys just slowly just gassed out, and I guess us 3 got away. I don't know if anyone else got away. That'd be interesting to see, but
yeah, I guess the dot vision is probably the best way to look back at it without talking to everyone. But Edo definitely didn't. 13 minutes, mate. That's a long time to be sitting and thinking and giving that's.
But I think it could have been a lot less if I just stopped and accepted that I went down and just try to recollect myself and get my energy back. Because when I went down, I just tried to get right back up in a minute or so, and I just didn't have enough energy. So that was kind of stupid. I just had to sit down and breathe and just accept it. It's just so hard when you're seeing everyone fly by and you're like, oh dude, I blew it.
Well, I think all 3 of us had a moment of exactly that feeling, that I've blown it.
Oh yeah,
in the race. At some point, and it was probably better to be having that at the start, in the respect that you've got 50 Ks to catch up versus I guess what I had with 2 Ks to go and what Oskar had with about 500 meters to go. It was a serious roller coaster. But let's go into that next patch. Once you got up, Edo, and into those sort of more decent bumps, how are you going? You've been probably the quickest all downwind month. You must have been mowing us down pretty quick.
Yeah, I think I was going really quick, but just because I chose a smaller wing and I kind of sacrificed that first and ending bit of the pumping. I just thought that's the biggest segment, so that's what we should be focusing the most. So yeah, I chose a small wing and I was going pretty fast, but I don't know about you guys, but my plan was kind of to conserve my energy a little bit until I got to China Walls. But after blowing it off the start, I was just thinking of going as fast as I could, and at all moments, I didn't really conserve myself, which I probably should have. But yeah, did you guys try to pace yourself in that second section when you got into the bumps, or were you just full on the whole way?
There you go, Oskar.
Yeah, I was kind of playing it a little bit by ear. I kind of knew I had the line that I wanted to set, which probably was a little more north than yours, James.
Mm-hmm.
And so I was in general veering, we were kind of losing each other a little. My main thing was, and I kind of knew if I was going north, the guys would come from the left. And so I was kind of just keeping an eye on that, but wasn't particularly trying to go fast, just kind of keep it pretty conservative. the bumps, effectively, you've got the swell coming from your right, moving or down the channel. So you follow them for too long, you lose your line. So I'd sit on my line, kind of saw where you were, Jimmy, and then if a couple sets came through or some big ones, I'd run with them for a little and just kind of see where I'd end up on your line, and then so I'd move back up to it and just kind of keep an eye on that. I was pretty conservative through the middle of the channel. No one was catching up. I was sort of like, there's not much point. And I think probably midway in the channel, I realized the legs were more hurt than I thought they were. I felt like the start was easy, but like you said, the adrenaline, I think that just overtook. And I kind of got to the middle and I was like, yeah, my legs shouldn't be this sore for what that felt like. And that was when I was like, I just went like to conservative mode after that and kind of was just zigzagging, keeping an eye on things and not kind of trying to push it at all.
Yeah.
How are you?
Yeah.
Because I think you're natural as well, aren't you?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. So you would have been looking at me, whereas you were on my left. So I was like keeping an eye, but I was still, really easy for what I was doing.
Yeah, I was exactly the same as you, but I guess a little bit further south. Like with my captain, we spoke about it, and he said, a little bit south of the run line is kind of what he was saying. And I had the run line on my watch, so I kind of knew like there's like a little arrow, and it'd sort of tell me like if I was on it or like a bit too south of it. And exactly like you were saying, like there was kind of the bumps that were running south, almost like past Diamond Head, and then there were the bumps that were sort of running right towards Makapu. And you're just trying to like take one or the other, and sort of in my perfect world, I was taking like bombing down south, and then I'd use that speed when the bumps run out to then run back right. And whenever I when I got that right, it felt really good. But then sometimes I felt like I'd gone a little bit too far south, and I just sort of pump back north, sort of back towards the line. And that's probably what taxed the legs the most. And there was a couple of moments I remember thinking, "Ooh, my back leg's a bit sore." When did that happen?
Yeah.
You know? It was kind of like I didn't in my head, I didn't think I was working that hard, but because I was on the slightly bigger foil, to push down the big south ones was a little bit of work. Once I got on them, it was happy, but then you didn't have the same glide as what you would on some smaller foils we've been using for most of the months, where you'd sort of cut back right, and with a little bit of wind, it's like you lost that little bit of glide. And because the bumps are kind of crisscross, it was in the middle. It was like, I'd be faster on a smaller foil for sure. Like we all would have been. But Edo, so that's where obviously you started catching us. Was that sort of similar to you?
Yeah, I was just really stoked. I had a lot of moments where I'm like going full speed. I'm looking at my watch and I'm like, yeah, that's like, I'm going really fast, and I was able to connect, like you said, the swells going down and then getting that speed to go up north. That was a big thing. But it was like really hard to feel the lift of the foil. Like I couldn't really concentrate and feel like if I was about to drop or I could have continued gliding. I had a lot of moments where I stalled out, like I just dropped in the middle of the channel. I think like 3 times. Just because I was too locked in into choosing what bump to go on. I wasn't like making sure I had enough lift on my foil. So I think the open ocean bumps in that particular channel are really different from any other channel that we've done. Just because there's a lot of times where you don't see the bump, but you're actually moving really fast and there's energy in the water. But if you look down, the bump's not actually there.
Yeah, they were much. Yeah, they were like they were flat, like they were like this.
Yeah.
Whereas like every other run we'd done, like even like when we practiced the finish line, like they're really steep like this, and you kind of like have this bit to drop down. Whereas it was just like these big flat things. And yes, it was, Oscar, you probably agree. You'd probably like for me they were more similar to home, like almost a bit more familiar.
Yeah.
Like it was.
Yeah, 100%. That's what I like. So many guys were like, it was so tough. There was multiple swells in the mix. I think like if you used to Maliko or even the Diamond Head run, it does like the swell wraps around and so it stacks everything, cleans it out. So you kind of got a fairly dominant swell and a wind. And that's kind of good. But out in the channel, like I reckon the midsection, there was at least 2 to 3 swells in the mix with the wind. Like all those, the ones coming under you from the east, were kind of big rollers, and they weren't as frequent. Whereas the ones coming from the north, they were like steeper and tighter and kind of running across. So you sort of, like for us back home, you often, you know, you got 2 to 3 swells with different periods in the mix, and you kind of find a rhythm between them. And I think for me through the channel, the wind bumps were irrelevant. They really weren't. There wasn't much to use with them. It was much more finding those kind of big east rollers and then kind of bouncing off those kind of north swells and kind of kicking off with the east ones and kind of zigzagging that way. But yeah, like you said, it's much closer to what we get back home.
Yeah. I spoke to Kai at the presentation, and he was like, man, there was no wind. I think those bumps were like built up like the week before. He's like, there wasn't even bumps. Yeah. He was like, man, it was so light. So it was, I think I've always found, like from doing the sort of downwind month in the past, Maui to Molokai and the Maliko sort of races are kind of dominated by the Hawaiian guys. And then Molokai to Oahu is always, I guess, benefited those who have less good conditions. So, and that's what we found. Like that's what I found anyway. It was a very different race to Molokai, Holokai, and the Maliko race. And just because it's not that good a downwinder. Really, it's a little bit cross. And that second quarter, I guess, that was really to me familiar to what I'd get at home, you know. So it was lucky that, I guess, for Oskar and I that we were there. But to be honest, I probably wouldn't have been using, like at home, I wouldn't use that sort of size foil in those sorts of bumps. So it was a little bit different and different to what we've been using all month too. But yeah, so I guess I think I had my fastest sort of kilometer in that section, and I was mainly around the 220s, maybe even to like 230s kind of thing. But I did like a couple 205s to 210s. That was sort of the quickest I was going. 205, I think, was my fastest K, which isn't bad, but like compared to what we were doing for most of the month, that was not quite enough to be hanging with the crew. You must have been doing a few low 2s, Edo.
Yeah, I was just panicking at the start and I didn't get to start my watch. So I don't know what I was actually on, but yeah, it felt really fast. I think the main good feeling is just when you're able to outrun the bumps and you're not like backing up from them. You know, you can pump and get up to speed and just sit on those nice fast bumps.
Yeah, no, I definitely got a couple of those.
Even if you have a smaller foil than that, like you're not going to be going faster than the bump.
Yeah. And Oskar, you must have been doing about the same as me, because I feel like I wasn't looking, like you were just there, but like just literally just there. And like Catherine was like, it's just you and Oskar. And I'm like, yeah, sweet. We'll just look at the bump in front. I don't care what Oscar's doing. It was just, I don't feel like I didn't.
I'm just looking at, I got the GPS, the times from all the GPSs.
I'll see if I can.
Which is interesting. So we all had to wear GPSs. Cool. First.
That's a good way to look.
So the first, by mile 8, I was 15 seconds in front of Jimmy, and Edo was exactly 5 minutes behind.
Wow.
Then the second up to from mile 8 to mile 16, Edo gained almost a minute on us. Our gap stayed pretty the same. We were I was 30 seconds. So I was probably pulling, 2 seconds per mile quicker averages.
Yeah.
But I was also running a little north. And obviously Edo was pulling it in, which interesting then at 24 miles, which is starting, that was when I kind of ran up quite north.
Yeah.
That was where you went quicker than I did. So you were about a second per mile quicker than me. I think I was probably wasting a little bit going north.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, actually, it just gives us the finish time. So it doesn't really, who knows what happened there. But yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I think Edo, while that mile 24, you were only just over 2 minutes back. So about the same. You're kind of gaining a minute and a half every 8 miles.
That's cool. That's good stats. That's my GPS tracker was on my boat. I didn't.
Yeah, same.
Yeah.
There's no way. I was saving every bit of weight possible. I was like, that thing. And I was like, nope.
Oh, that thing is so small.
I was like, go on onto the boat.
Yeah.
Thanks, guys. Yeah. Maybe you needed to get.
I think
rid
I
of
forgot
it.
about my GPS tracker for hours, and I think my finish time was like way down somewhere. Yeah.
Oh, you didn't hand it in?
I handed in it like late in the evening.
Yeah, me too. My stepmom was running around with it. Where do I give this? I'm like, I don't know. And then one of the, I think Robbie handed it back to the guys for me. But it was okay. Let's get to that middle section, because to me, there was that kind of big flat sort of rolly bumps after the start, and then it changed quite abruptly. And I guess from doing the race before, they call it like the Makapu shelf. There's like just basically the water and the current changes, and it basically just when you feel like you're close, it goes, no, the bumps are changing. It's going to be way different. And it basically, for me, it was harder to sort of navigate because you steeper bumps, you're either on a really good one or you were looking for something to use is what I found. Like it was like I was either running really well or all of a sudden I had no energy to go anywhere. And that's when I really found that my legs were cooked. I'm like, because you were on a good one, you think, this is sweet. And then you'd like sort of have to pull off or go right to sort of get in. And you're like, and my back leg. And this is when I really moved my feet around a lot to sort of try to limit and like conserve, I guess. That was when I really thought about conserving. So probably just before that messy section, but like it was too late. But yeah, how do you guys find that? And like what sort of lines were you taking? What was working, what wasn't working, and what was fatiguing you guys the most in that sort of stretch heading into China Wall? Maybe go Edo.
Go Edo.
Okay. I don't know. When I got there, I was like, all right, I'm home. Like, I feel like I'm close enough where the bumps are. Like, I've been practicing just outside of Allen Davis, outside of Sandy's, like that mix over there. So it was really familiar. Even though they were bigger and steeper and just gnarlier bumps, where a lot of times you'll like breach right at the peak of the bump and can get a gnarly wipeout, it just felt a lot easier just because I've been in those situations before. Whereas like before that, in the section before that, where it was like a lot less energy in the swell, it happened that I just dropped out of nowhere and I didn't even know why. I just stalled just because I didn't have that speed that I was used to in the bumps. So for me, it was definitely a lot easier and I just felt comfortable. But I don't know, was it different for you guys?
You go, Oscar.
Yeah, I think the foil that I was on, like this, like it was obviously bigger because we could make it out off the start, and it was the stall speed I kind of never got close to. It did, I think, that kind of middle, after kind of halfway that in through the channel, the bumps kind of started jacking and you started getting some bigger, a lot steeper ones. I kind of used that section because just to kind of recover more than anything. I think there was having bigger, steeper bumps, you could just carry through the bumps easier. You still needed a faster foil that could actually ride those and make use of them, but it was just more use them. They were just such good energy boosts. So I was just conserving as much as I could. But it's also tricky. Like when your legs are that cooked, you kind of, you drop into some of those bigger ones, you kind of tense, kind of just holding on a little bit. So it wasn't as good of a recovery as I thought. So I was probably peeling off more than I would have liked rather than running with them. It was more same thing, my back leg. I was it kind of was locking at maybe 35 Ks and I was like, kind of need to just start using just my front foot on the pump. So, and I was also, I think the adrenaline, like you're a bit more tense, but also I noticed the first time on all these runs that I've noticed my feet were going a little numb. And I think I just was a bit more tense, wasn't moving my feet around as much, whereas kind of just took a little moment to I was like, all right, just relax, move your feet around. And like, that was where I could kind of focus on using my front leg more and just kind of listen to my body more and play the race a little bit more by ear rather than just focus on pumping and going fast.
Yeah, no, same for me. It was, I found that the bumps I wanted to ride were those ones that were just big and running sort of almost a bit more south, but you rode too many of them and you ended up too far south and you had to pump sort of more into the wall and it was that was taxing. So I feel like I made a lot of mistakes in that section, but like not major ones, just like lots of little ones where you sort of get on a good one. You think, okay, this is sweet. And you sort of get that little, they had like a wedge. You sort of wedge like in towards, and it felt great. And instead of sort of chasing, like I guess what had been all month, chasing and sort of straight, I was almost like thinking I was going to peel off and just like take the safe option going right. But it just, because of the wind and the backwash, it just robbed you of speed quite fast. And you sort of got in this position where I felt like I got in a position where I sort of had to pump a little bit and then like almost cut back one way and then cut back the other way and then slot in again. And that was only like maybe one or two pumps, because I was the same with you, Oscar. I was like pretty severely, well, not severely, but I was overfoiled for that section. Like I would have loved to be on something smaller. But the one or two pumps, because my legs were cooked, actually really like I've like kind of started cramping in my back quad. And so I started to move my feet around to sort of stand a little bit further forward to sort of, like pump from the front foot more than the back foot. And I started paddling instead of having to pump between those bumps. So I just sort of like take a few paddle strokes to try to like just save that back leg as much as I could. At the same time, my boat captain's saying, "You've got this, you're due an Oscar. And like, they're like, he's like, push the finish. And I'm like, I'm not pushing right now. I'm conserving right now. This is, I know what's coming. And if I push now, I will fall over when I get to China Wall. Turns out I did that anyway, but
yeah, I think that approach was much more conservation than anything. I think the north, like in looking back on it, like taking that a little bit more north line, like as soon as I wanted to turn and run with the swell, it was probably an easier line in. Mm-hmm. And I kind of knew that it's kind of just timing it and waiting it. I knew if I saw someone, as soon as they kind of got up into my peripheral, I could kind of run down and have a faster line to get in front and stay in front. And then I could kind of battle. So I kind of used it to just stay there and just watch. Like I never had to, it was a good time for me to just recover and kind of relax. But then the same thing happened. As soon as my legs started locking out, I was like, I don't even if I wanted to turn and go, if someone was catching up, I was like, my legs aren't going to be able to do this and make the China Wall sing. So it just ended up becoming a conservate, like you're just conserving anyway. So, I kind of had that tactic, but the same thing, when the adrenaline kicks in, the legs were just worse than I thought they were, which that's racing. And I'm glad that you said that you had the same thing, because I was like, by like 40 Ks, I was stressing. I was like, how am I going to make the pump? I got to get around China Wall. I was stressing.
Yeah, no, I was exactly the same. I was like, man, how am I going to save my legs? And I thought, save my back leg, and then my front leg started going. Yeah. And I'm like,
oh no.
I was like, ooh, that's when I started you trying to utilize the paddle a little more, because like even the front foot pump was kind of like, okay, let's go to paddle. And then as we're getting closer to China Wall and you sort of seeing all the texture on the rock and everything, and my captain goes, Edo's catching. I'm like,
oh no.
Frick. I was like, man. I haven't even heard of him all race yet. He's just like obviously kind of caught up. But in the back of my mind, I was actually still more worried about Oscar because of the way the start panned out. The fact that Oscar and I had both kind of similar size foils from the way we were sort of tracking, but then also because the fact you caught up so quickly. I remember saying to my stepmom, I was like, I'm not really concerned. Like afterwards, I said to him, I wasn't that concerned about Edo because he was catching so quickly. Sort of suggested that he was on a fast foil, which meant he would have to be further ahead at this point for him to have a chance at pumping as far as I thought I could pump in.
I thought the exact same thing. I was like, shoot, I'm getting to China Walls and I'm not even like that far in front. So it's going to be so much harder. But now that I think about it, that last section, I just remember like that feeling that my foil was just thirsty for those like big juicy bumps. And I finally got into them and I was like, yeah, let's go. Like this is what I've been waiting for the whole channel. Yeah. So I really tried to lock in there and it felt good. But also my legs somehow, my back leg started cramping too. So I remember like just like almost cussing at my back leg. I'm like, no, we're going. Like, this is what I've been waiting for. You need to go. Yeah. But I ended up like squatting, like kind of Asian squatting on the board, like really low to stretch out the quads. And that ended up helping a lot when you're on the bump and you just squat down.
Yeah.
I don't know if you guys tried that, but it it totally worked. Yeah.
Yeah, I've tried it in like a training run. I don't think I've ever done it in a race though. But yeah, that makes sense. It's just like sort of it puts it's you just need time off it. Like you just needed to reset. Like I was shuffling my feet around to try to like and like almost instead of bending the front knee when I'm on those big bumps, I was just trying to get my hips over the front leg and like almost straight legs. And that was sort of allowing the legs to rest rather than just being that like sort of quarter squat the whole time. But yeah, the full squat, good one. Yeah, the power boost was the squat boost, but sort of not so much. And then I guess to me, like to be honest, I felt like the second half of the race, I literally didn't see anyone. I saw your boat every now and then, Oscar, but I didn't see any actual foiler until like probably 200 meters from China Wall, and I was literally just a little bit south, I guess, even coming into China Wall. And I remember my boat captain just said, "You got to get to the wall." And I looked across to the wall, and there was Oskar, and then Edo right next to it, like behind. And it's like this. I felt like I was just like, you guys are just taking this epic little, epic line on the inside, and I was stuck outside, and I was rattled. I'm like, I felt like I was so in control, and then all of a sudden I just looked to my right like this, and there was just like 1, 2 people gone, and I went from what I thought I was first to third, and had to have this like sort of gnarly pump in, rather than I was just sort of trying to sort of not go so far in. But when I saw you two, I'm like, I got to get in there, and so maybe Oscar, explain like, as we approached the wall, what you could see and what your plan was.
Yeah, so the wall caught up on me a little quicker than I thought. I had you on my left, and I kind of knew I was probably quicker to the wall because I was just higher up, and I knew you were going to have to come up to it. So I kind of just stayed on my line, just kept it pretty straight. But it wasn't like I kind of had your boat there, and I was like, all right, I know it'll be probably 4 to 5 bumps up by the time I get to the wall if we keep what we're like the lines we're on. And that was when a second boat came in. I assumed it was Andrew's. I never saw Andrew's boat, but it was just I saw the Barracuda board, and I was like shit. I was like, where's Andrew been this whole race? And I was stressed. I was just like, oh shit, because I knew Andrew was on a bigger foil and he could make the whole pump. So I was like, oh God, so that was kind of the first bit. And then all of a sudden, kind of looked back and the colors were wrong on the board, and I was like, no, that's not Andrew. I don't really know who this is. Like, we got around China Walls, and I knew like you were 1 bump back, and I was just like, a whole like coming around that corner was wild. Like it went from being you had no one around, it was pretty calm and quiet, kind of talking to your boat now and again, but otherwise pretty well just in your own head, to turning the corner, and like we all just converged, and it was like 8, 9 boats just hammering on the left. You got media boats. China Walls erupted. Like I heard there was like Lisa was up ahead and like Aussie. And it was like sick. And then all of a sudden I was like, all right, like I know he's like just behind. And then all of a sudden I just hear these like everyone's cheering for Edo. Like all the local Hawaiian just like erupts as Edo comes through. And I was just like, oh, man. I was like, I'm going. And like then there's like a media chopper hovering, and it was just like trying to keep it calm, but also just like got a job to do. And then it was pretty brutal, that pump in. I mean, I think the boats stayed far, like at least where I was, they were far enough away that they didn't kind of interfere with my line. But I was kind of thinking that like they weren't that far off. Like they would have been, by the time say where you were, Jimmy, they would have been throwing wake at you that would have been screwing your line up, and it would have got messy quickly, I think.
Yeah, it was. I was. As I said, that was like that was the 1 kilometer I fully stuffed up, like in every respect of it. Rattled from you guys coming, and then the media boat sort of flew, that big yellow boat sort of flew in, and I was like,
that was crazy.
Yeah, it didn't really stuff me up, but it was just like the sensors were overloaded because you're out in the channel and you're just so calm and you're just sort of finding your line, and then all of a sudden, Oskar, Edo, media boat, boom! It was just like, wow, too much going on, and that's part of the race. But Edo, what did you find? You obviously mowing us down, and then as you came to the wall, you sort of slotted in behind Oskar.
Yeah, I mean, like knowing that I had a little bit of a smaller foil, I was really concerned getting into the wall because I knew you guys had it in you to like pump longer, and you're both a bit of pumping beasts. So it was definitely a big concern of mine. But it's cool. Like when we got the China Walls, like Oskar said, everyone was just blowing up, and like got so much energy from like the crowd over there. But I knew that that's kind of like the start of the race. When you get there, everything could change, you know, like the guy in front could get a wave. Maybe you don't get a wave, or you get a wave and he doesn't get a wave. Like everything is going to change. So getting into that, I was just trying to stay as close as I could to Oscar to just get on the same wave as him. But I ended up being right behind. So I got the wave just behind his. So we were just like staggered by one wave. And I wasn't really looking behind. Like I wasn't looking at where James was or anyone else. I was just thinking about pumping as far as I could. Because by that time we were all so exhausted. It's almost, you kind of start getting tunnel vision, you know, you're not really aware of everything else going on. You're just like, in my head, it was like every extra pump I give is probably 10 less paddles. So I was just like trying to focus on getting as many pumps as I could and keep flying. But it was crazy. There's that yellow cat, like a 36-foot cat that went between the rocks at China, like the boils at China Walls and the wall in that little section right there. I was like, that's crazy. How did that even happen? And I thought it would give me a little bit of wake and maybe help me, but it didn't. I just went on the wave right behind. And yeah, when I went down eventually pretty close to pillars, I just saw Oscar keep pumping and I was like, yep, he's gone. Like there goes first place. So I just put my head down and started paddling. And yeah, and then you came behind and freaking pumped the whole way almost. That was crazy.
Oh, I fully, like, so you probably guys don't know what happened because you were ahead, but I literally, maybe it was the boat wash, but I think, to be honest, it was just my misjudgment. When I came into China Wall, because I sort of had to go a little bit more into the wind than you guys, I sort of came in and lost a bit of speed, but sort of was okay. And then I was that set, I guess it was the set you guys were on, or maybe the set just after you guys were on. There were like 2 bumps just in front of me. And I'm thinking, I got to catch up to Oskar and Edo. There's this set just in front of me. I got to try to get up and over these bumps so I can ride them. And so I take a couple paddle strokes and I take one last deep one. And as I go to take it, a backwash sort of came and I sort of just set me a little bit onto my toe side. So I paddled that little bit deeper and I hit my foil with my paddle and just
no.
And so I go like, and I didn't even come off, but I hit it and I'm like sort of a little bit like sort of came back and I almost went into a stall and I took another stroke and then just slapped down. I didn't come off the board, but I stopped. And so I'm standing on my board off foil. China Wall's like 100 meters further in where all the people are. And I'm trying to paddle sort of in and trying to find a bump. And I was like just inside the wind line, but just too far out that I was getting all this backwash. And I'm starting to paddle. I'm trying to my mind is just going into overdrive. I'm trying to problem solve and I'm like trying to paddle in and then just like I got to find the bump. And I sort of paddling, and I think that video I posted yesterday, like I just sort of paddling and then all of a sudden I start sort of paddling like almost towards Hawaii Kai. Towards the Hawaii Kai run, Diamond Head. And I'm like paddling, I'm like, that's the wrong way. If I paddle up that way, I'm going to miss like the finish altogether. So I just like think, shit. So I lie down and in my head, I'm saying, you might be paddling in from here. So I start paddling in. And so because Edo and I did a run, I guess 3 days before the race, and both times I pretty much nailed it, like all the way in to like inside seconds. But the 2 times I'd done that run on a foil, and I'm like, that's what I had in my head. That's what I'd like envisioned, and I've got to go all the way in. And but I'd never fallen off at that point. And I'm like, what am I? In my head, I'm like, fuck. I'm like, can I even get up from here? Like, do I have to paddle from here all the way to the finish? And in my head, I'm like, okay, I just thought I was leading for, like, Oscar and I were pretty much leading for the first 90% of the race. And now I'm going to paddle in and probably get overtaken by like 10 people. So I paddle in and I go next to China Wall and I hear all the Aussies, but I didn't really, it was all just noise. And I was so disappointed in myself that I was like, nah, like, forget it. And I paddle into this little bump and everyone sort of cheers. And I was like, okay, here I get it back on track. And I get up and it's a tiny little bump, but I'm like, okay, I just got to milk this as far as I can. And I sort of go in between the rocks and then in towards pillars. And it just felt like it went flat, like the swell completely disappeared. And I came down before I even got to pillars. And in my head, I'm like, this is the worst I've ever, like, because I'd done it twice and I had all this confidence and all my confidence just went to like the rock bottom. And I'm like, man. So I lay on my stomach and I started paddling in and I saw these few little waves of pillars and I'm like, okay, I'm going to go in towards there. And I'm lying on my stomach and I could look up and I could just see you, Edo. But Oskar, I couldn't see. I just figured, I'm like, Oscar's in. Like he's probably pumped to the finish or at least to the markers and there's like no chance. And I'm paddling in on my stomach and I'm sort of just trying to process everything. I've fallen off twice in less than a kilometer. And I'm like, oh, what have I done? And then I look behind me and I see this 3-wave set and I start paddling on my stomach a little bit quicker. And then when the first one comes under me, I jump up to my feet and the waves didn't break at pillars, but they were, just enough to sort of stand up and have that sort of, wasn't so much of a headwind, like the bump, the swell cancelled out the headwind. Second one goes under me. I'm like, all right. Third one is the one I'm going to paddle up on. And I sort of turn in towards the break and paddle up and get up. And I'm like, okay. And it was a nice bump. And I'm sort of running with it and going across and going along. And I see you, Edo, and I'm like, okay, he's on my left. Just got to stay inside him and sort of run with the swell, pumping along. I see Edo. Sweet. Got past Edo. And then I see you, Oskar, and I'm like, oh, he didn't make it as far as I thought. And I was like, I wonder if I can get to him. And I think you were pretty much at seconds then, Oskar. And I sort of pump across from the inside of pillars across to seconds and managed to link it up with just the tiniest of little swells moving through and I'm pumping. And I just like fully blocked every bit of noise out. And I think like you were saying, like you were just swearing your back leg. And I'm like, in my head, I was like, don't even listen to your back leg. Let's just like block everything else out. You just got to go as far as you can. And I was milking the wave, and then the wave disappeared pretty much where you were, Oskar. And I'm just like, no, I've got to make this gap as big as I can because Oskar, he's been probably paddling for a little bit. So he's probably going to be fresh-ish to be able to potentially paddle up again. And I just start taking a few paddle strokes and I'm just like gritting my teeth. I'm like, I was just going as far as I could. And I got, I guess, kind of, it's like the second red and green markers, I think is where I got to. Like, and I'd never gotten that. Like the 2 runs I'd done, I'd only gotten to the first ones. So I was just like put everything into that. And like, but when I came down, I was like, Oscar's just there. In my head, I only had like 30 meters. Like I thought I only had that sort of far, that sort of distance. But I looked back at Kahi and Kavika's live and I had a bit more than that. How funny was that? Was that live commentary, by the way?
I loved how it changed. I watched it at first and it was like, they're like, Edo, you got this.
Yeah.
Kill him and all this sort of stuff. And I was like, oh man, I was like, that was a bit heavy to rewatch.
Yeah.
And then like I watch it back and it'll like all of a sudden Jimmy goes past and they're like, Oskar, get him. Like just saying the exact same thing. They're just cheering for whoever's in second to just get off. Like they'll always take the Hawaiian boys. But when it comes to like the battle, they'll just always like, come on, like get him. And it was good, but it was tricky as well. Like I kind of at one, like, I probably made it somewhere between pillars and twos. I came down and just got slapped with a gust, which just, I didn't see it coming.
It just
like you see them usually rippling across the water and that one it just took me off guard. And like, same thing, like you said, you're so tunnel visioned and like, it's interesting how, like I was cramping, like leading into China walls. I could feel the legs kind of locking up. But as soon as the eruption came from the crowd and like just running through that section, like, man, I didn't even feel my legs. It was you're just going as far as you could. Like it was wild, the adrenaline. But then it was, I hit that gust, probably outside twos. And I paddled through twos and there was 3 surfers out. And I kind of said that. I was like, has anything come through? And they're just like, nah. Like, is there anything coming? They're just like, nah. And I was just like, I'm not going to stand up, start looking around for waves. Like you're so cooked at that stage. And like, you look back on it and you're like, maybe I should have waited for a wave. Maybe I should have done this. But you're like, you're hurting so much. Like you're not thinking that straight. So it was just more like, just put your head down and go. And I think that was as soon as I got inside probably the first channel marker, like kind of in the channel, that was when you kind of flew past Jimmy. And I was like, originally I put my head down, I had my head down, I looked up and I saw someone pumping past and I thought it was, I had the same thing in my head. I'm like, it was Andrew. And I put my head back down. I was like, oh no, like another Hawaiian got it. Like, and I looked up again. I was like, oh, it's Jimmy. And I was like, I was weirdly stoked. I was like, sick. I was like, that's epic. And then I was kind of like, but also then like kind of sitting, I was like, oh, I've just lost it. But I don't know, I was just like, yeah, another Aussie boy, like that's epic. And kind of put my head down and started just paddling. The gap was, it was definitely more than 30 meters, maybe more like 40 to 50. So I kind of knew I wasn't going to have you on the paddle, which kind of like opened up the whole, like I kind of had to start making like a game plan. And I was like trying to yell at my boat to be like, how far back's Edo? Because I knew you were on a bigger board. So I was like, I need to have enough of a gap. Because I was planning, I was like, all right, go slow on the paddle then, like back off, let yourself recover and get some energy back, and then go for a flat water and try and get it to the line. But they just like, I was kind of yelling, but I wasn't getting anything back. And like by that stage, there was like skis were coming up and buzzing you with cameras. There was like, Kahi and them were out there. Like there was just too much going on to kind of get any answers out of anyone. So I kind of got to one point where I was like, I'm just going to get to my feet and have a crack. And like, I didn't realize how tired I was until I started paddling then. I was like, it was pretty early. You just take a few strokes and like tried to push the legs down a bit. And I was like, okay, this isn't happening. Like I'm nowhere near getting the board out. And with that headwind, like it just wasn't happening. So I was kind of accepted it by that stage.
Kavika filmed that paddle up, I think, on his live pretty well. And you jumped up and you're like sort of super determined. It looks like you're paddling, and then you sort of went to take a few strokes and you sort of just bulged your toe side rail and jumped off.
I was just like, nah, this isn't happening.
I was like, oh. But in my head, like I was pretty sure I had you, Edo, because you were sort of still outside a fair bit. But in my head, I'm like, Oscar's just been paddling on his stomach for a bit. He's using a bigger foil similar to me. Surely he's got, like, if I was him, like I'm trying to play like if I'm Oscar, I'm standing up and I'm going to try to paddle up onto foil and just sort of fly past. It was, I was so anxious. Like that last however long it was on your stomach, I'm just like, don't look back. And I'm thinking in my head, I'm like, I'm a shit paddler. Like I'm not even paddling that quick. And you just like all these things in your head. You're like, okay, conserve. And maybe, and then I was like, I'm not sure if you saw me, Oscar, I tried to jump up and paddle up and I got kind of close, but it was just, I had to move my back foot back to get any lift. My legs weren't working. So I had the paddle speed, but my legs, like I had to get my back foot back and I never had the foot, like my leg was probably just all cramped and I couldn't get that lift off. But it was.
Did you consider kind of going sidewind instead of going headwind and getting it up that way?
Well, at the end, how it sort of goes straight and then turns to the finish line.
Yeah.
And that's when I'm like, okay, I'd done it. I'd practiced it that time we did it, and I sort of paddled in. I went in towards the red mark and then turned out to the green and then went sort of across that way. And that was my game plan to sort of. But then my boat captain was like, cut the corner. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good idea. Like cut the corner, like started to go. But then I was like, took a few strokes towards the red, then jumped up and went to paddle. And I was trying to time it between the gusts. You could sort of see the gusts coming, and there was just like no gap. And I'm like, Oscar's coming. And I'm like, shut up, paddlers. And I didn't get up and I was like lay down, just went paddling even more. And I still thought at that point, because of exactly what you said, Edo, like that wind kind of coming across, I'm like, Oscar could still paddle up here. And I honestly, I didn't enjoy it. Like that last bit was so stressful. It was until I literally paddled across past those orange markers. I was like, I think I like splashboard and I was just like, look behind. I'm like, yeah. I was just so stoked that, because I the whole time I was so stressed that I was going to get overtaken that last bit. But it was, it was
so brutal.
So brutal. Crazy
it's a long
race.
Finish that one. I think it's everyone's been asking that, like, would you want to change it? Do you want to finish out in the bumps? And it does add a spectacle to it. I think it was, it didn't work out in my favor, but it was also like it made for such an epic battle. And I think it makes for a more interesting channel crossing. Like obviously that flat start, that middle section, and then the kind of strange finish, like it just means that everyone can take different approaches. Like if you look at, say, the M2M race, like realistically, you kind of like within the first 10 minutes can almost pick the top 5 if no one comes off foil. Like there's a few guys kind of moving a little bit quicker, just sort of those gaps stretch out and they kind of finish in the same sort of order. Like there were little battles and like kind of stuff from just inexperiences. But I think next year, like everyone's going to be pretty tuned into that line. So whereas this, it was, you can take a longer board, small foil, paddle out. Like there's game plans, there's strategy. It's never over.
Yeah.
And that's what I reckon kind of is what makes it such a cool event. So I'm still on the fence about it. And like, so many guys have just been like, oh, but you were like the fastest across the channel. And like, but I was like, yeah, but if it was a race to the channel, we all would have ridden different things. I'm like, it doesn't actually matter. Like we were all anticipating that finish. So
yeah, we all knew the
us across
finish
the channel means
was,
nothing.
Yeah, we all knew the finish was going to be what it was. So it was, I actually, like going into it, what was your guys' game plan? So Edo sounded like you were kind of thinking, just use what you've been using.
I was just thinking like, I'm going to use the smallest foil I can comfortably flat water pop up on and make the start into the wind line. And then when I'm in the bumps, I'll probably be going as fast as I can because I'm on the smallest foil. And then I was like, by the time we get to China Wall, it's going to be really high tide. So, you know, all the breaks over there are barely going to be breaking and the wind's going to be straight in your face. So I didn't think anyone would have made it that far, especially because there's no swell. So I thought, you know, just make the best you can till China Walls. And then after that, it's just like everyone's going to be on their stomach paddling. So just a small wing. Yeah, that was my game plan.
Yeah. And then what about the run we did? And you was telling everyone I pumped all the way to the finish. So Edo and I did that run really.
Yeah. It was crazy. I mean, I remember I didn't want to use all my energy just because we were like, it was a few days before the race and I felt like we should have started resting well before that.
Yeah.
But yeah, I don't know how much longer before the race you guys started resting, but I was really concerned about like saving my legs and just like coming into the race with 100% energy. But yeah, that day that we tried the finish, it was like I only didn't make it to pillars. And I remember you pumping, like you had so much energy just pumping all the way to seconds, and I saw you kept going, and then I didn't see you for a while, and then I think I saw you like almost flat watering, like headwind. Like I was just like mind blown by how much energy you had. And even on a day where we were supposed to be resting, I was like, oh shit, like this guy's gonna make it all the way to the keyhole on race day.
No, that's
what I had in my mind, because I think Andrew, it might have even been you, Ed, is like, dude, Jimmy made it all the way to the finish like yesterday or the day before.
No, I was the one spreading rumors like that. I thought it was real, but yeah.
Dude, that rattled me. That was like all that was going through my head through the channel. I was like, do I put my head down and go? And I was like, no. I was like, save it. Like keep Jimmy there. Just save the legs. He can pump the whole way. And I was just like, I was so rattled. And I was just like, I got around the corner and was just like, doesn't matter what happens, Jimmy's pumping the whole way. And I was rattled at that stage. And like as soon as I came down, the whole way was like the biggest stress. I was just anticipating it. I was like, someone's going to pump past. But then when I came down, I looked back and like no one was on foil. I kind of had that weird, like I was still anticipating you were going to be a faster paddler than me. So I was just like, he's going to be catching. He's like, no matter what, you were just grinding so hard. And it was funny, like even the day after, like even today, like my legs were cut. They were like, by that night were pretty good. Like they were a bit sore that night, but like next morning, like good to go. But my arms, like we've been here for a month and I've done zero surfing. Like my paddle fitness is like the worst it's been in years. And to then finish your race just paddling for 20 minutes as hard as you can, like my shoulders were shot. That was so brutal.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I'd never done that on the run on the foil, Edo. So like when we did that run together, I was like, I want to see how hard I can push, because just obviously not the best for the physical, like the body, not the best for the physical sort of state of things. But like I'm like, this finish is going to be mental, and if I can show myself that I can get as far as possible, and obviously after 5Ks it's going to be different to after 50Ks. But like I was like, I want to see how far I can go. When I got to like just inside twos, and then I went to paddle up in that headwind bit. I don't think I got up on that practice run we did, but then I got up on the inside going across towards the
keyhole.
And I was like, okay, that's what I'm going to do for the race day. And I actually did it again the day after because I wanted to try it with the tide being higher. So I was like, that was low tide, so it doesn't really, and we got a pretty good set when we did that practice run together. Like we got a nice wave coming through.
It was good. Yeah.
And so I was like, I want to see how I go without a set. And I did the run the day after. I went from Sandy's and just pumped like out to the run line, and then went in and I got like almost the exact same spot without a wave. And I'm like, in my head, confidence was at an all-time high. And then people were saying like, oh, there's rumors you're going all the way to the finish. And I'm like, nah, not to the finish, because I honestly thought people could potentially go all the way in to like between the channels and into the keyhole. And I'm like, nah, I just got to the markers. I didn't get all the way in. And I was like, nah, just a rumor. But it's pretty funny. A few people like sort of messaged. I think Jack messaged and Brady messaged like, oh,
Yeah.
I heard you go all the way to the finish. And I'm like, no, just a rumor, boys. Don't buy into it.
And that's crazy because the next day I was talking to Matt and he said the exact same thing. He's like, bro, I saw him pump all the way to the freaking keyhole. And I was like, oh, I knew it. Everyone's doubting me. Like everyone thought that I was just like trying to get in their heads, but I was like, I swear I saw him paddling all the way. But
yeah. And I made it all the way in 3 goes, I guess, but like laying down in between. But that to me was similar to you, Ed. I was trying to do the math, and the race, I actually underestimated the start, to be honest. I thought the start was going to be a bit easier than that. I thought it was maybe a 2K pump, but the bumps were going to be enough to sort of keep us going. But we're all riding falls that are so fast now that the wind had to be stronger, or the fetch has to be longer. And so, that I didn't anticipate that, but I'd sort of planned that the finish you could make up, because Dave Kassane had done it, timed it on his watch, and he was telling me, like, mate, bring a set of sunglasses because the spray is going to be intense. He's like, and just paddle into the finish. He goes, it's 30 minutes. 30 minutes paddle in, everyone's going to be doing it. And I remember like chatting to him, like, mate, I reckon it's possible. You just need a little bit of swell, because I remember seeing Lenny do it in 2019, and it was like bugger all swell, and it was so windy that year. So I was like, no, I think it's doable. And that's why like that afternoon that in my head, I'd sort of played it through. And then when I did it, that afternoon with you, Edo, I was like, okay, this is on. And you're saving a lot of time by using like I guess a bigger fall for that section. And it was like, I was trying to do the math in my head, like 40 Ks in the channel in good bumps. And then you got the shitty stuff at the start and the shitty stuff at the end.
Yeah.
How much are we losing by using a bigger foil in that good 40 Ks? And I was like, well, if it's 10 seconds, it's probably too much. If it's 20 seconds, it's definitely too much. If it's just, 5 seconds, it's probably going to be pretty close. I think my maths I didn't do the full math, but I'm like, I think I'm just going to go with it. So I'm just going to go with it, because I tried I was using a smaller foil for M2M and paddle and lure. And I did a few Palale runs before I left Maui, and I did a back-to-back on the 770 than the 860. And I actually went faster on the 860. Like the speeds were that similar. So like I wasn't losing any top end. So in my head, that's the first time I'd used that foil, so I sort of wrote it off as too big. And actually Marcus and Ben brought it over. And I actually said to him, I said, don't even bother bringing the 860 for me, because I wanted this smaller toe wing that we got coming out. And I was like, just bring the toe wing for me. And Mark's like, I'm just going to bring it and just leave the toe wing. He's like, no, I'm not going to use it. Just bring the toe wing. And he's like, Jimmy, I'm bringing you another race wing that you might use in Hawaii, not a toe wing that you're not going to use until you get home. And I'm like, nah, stop it. I'm not going to use it. And so anyway, he brought it over. And the day before the race, I'm like, Marcus, I'm sorry, you were right. I'm using this the 860. And he's like, I told you, mate. But it was crazy that, like you said before, Edo, the speed of the bumps, everyone was maxing out the speed of the bumps, like kind of on whatever foil we were using. Like on a small foil, we were going faster than them. And on the slightly bigger foils, I found I was going maybe a touch off the pace, but not too much. It was just like less pumping. So it was super interesting to me that that last week of testing in Maui was like, just made this breakthrough. Like I feel like I can go as fast, but then have the option to be able to paddle up earlier and later, I guess. So that was the sort of game plan I went with in terms of that slightly bigger foil, which, was probably the difference, to be honest. That was, and the fact that the start was so flat, it sort of played into, I think, our hands a bit, Oscar, too, which, but I'm interested to be, I know you can't say what foil it is, Oscar, because it's a proto, but like, how much bigger was it than what you'd been using for like M2M and paddle and lure?
So it was the same like size and dimension, but we tweaked the section for the one that I raced M2O. It's same thing, super high aspect ratio. Nath won't tell me the dims on it because He knows I'll tell everyone about it, and I'm just far too much of a frother. So I don't know. I know it'd be best guess. I was trying to hold it up to other ones and work out, like, it'd be under 800. But that was the smallest one I had. So I probably, like, M2M and paddle Imua, I should have been on smaller foils. I just didn't have any. Realistically, I think probably where my weight is, I should have been on something in the 600s. So being in the 700s, I knew I could flat water it comfortably and pump it, ages out. It's the same as, like, we did when we do the Molokai runs. I think it's a good test. You paddle out in the gulch in the flat water and pump out into the wind line. And if you've got something that you can make that stretch out pretty comfortably, then it's probably something similar to what the M2O kind of size would be. But I think, I think a lot of guys, I kind of got written off for M2O, which I also wasn't bummed about. I think I never got an opportunity to actually, like, have a good hit out. Like, M2M, I just cooked everything about that race. And, like, I was still happy with my numbers that I was getting out of it, but it was just I wasn't in the fight. So kind of everyone was like, oh, well, like, he's not really competitive. And it was the same as paddle Imua. I think it was all wind bumps. So it was sort of like wherever you started. I think I saw you, Jimmy, when I got up, you were like 5 bumps ahead. Kai was kind of 2 to 3 bumps ahead, and we all, like, somewhat stayed the same. Like, those bumps stretch out over that distance, but it was like by the time we got to the end, I was like, well, Kai's still 2 bumps ahead, and you're probably that same 5 or 6 bumps, which at a 10, 15-second period gets you that kind of the time gaps we were off by. And so it was interesting. Yeah, like, looking back on it, I probably wouldn't change my foil, but I think, for all the other races where it's a bump start, bump finish, definitely would have sized down if I had the option. But it's also, being your first race, you're pretty nervous on the start line. Like, especially for M2M, like, I think it took me like 3 goes to get up, just because, like, I got to my feet and was so nervous, and, like, my legs were, like, locking up. I was making so many mistakes just paddling. So it was good by the time I got to M2O, I was kind of got the cobwebs off and kind of learnt a lot, at least, about the start, and it was sort of a smoother start. But I think what were you on, Edo? You were obviously small.
Yeah, I was like a 750.
Yeah.
But I think I had a bit of a less liftier section than what you guys were riding. But the day I went out with James and we practiced it, I was like, I kind of had set in my mind what I wanted to ride like 2 weeks before, so I wasn't stressing about changing anything. Like, I remember a lot of people telling me, like, oh, you should try the shim or change your tailwing. And I was like, no, this is what I'm riding. Don't get anything. Like, I don't want to be confused about anything or change anything. Like, this is what I'm going to ride no matter what, because I thought, I could pump it. Like, paddle Imua, the conditions were pretty light. The bumps were really small. And even the finish was like pretty hard to pump through. And if I was able to do that on that small wing, I thought I would have been able to do the channel too. But that day we went out with James and practiced it, I was like freaking out because I didn't even make it to pillars. So the days after that, I was like supposed to be resting, but I was just testing out like different tail wings and different front wings to see if anything would be easier. And I was like stressing so much about it, but I ended up just keeping the same front wing I was comfortable with, just getting a little bit of a bigger rear wing and going with that. Just improve that low end a little bit.
Yeah. It's there's so many ways to sort of like tune your gear for those sorts of races.
Yeah.
Actually, paddle and we should talk about a bit more, because I haven't spoken to either of you two really about paddle and not on the podcast. But Edo, you were not officially registered. You're the renegade. You're renegade champ.
Yeah.
And but there was a pretty cool moment in that race where I guess you and I were out front, and you say to me, you go, James, where is everyone? And I'm like, dude, you're winning. You're like, oh.
This is a really short race. So like we weren't even that tired. And I was just like, dude, is this like, it's always been so close with all the other guys. I guess we had a really good start. Yeah. And that put us pretty far in front.
Yeah. But there was a moment in Paddle and Mill where we're both, like, it was probably just after that discussion, mid bump, mid race. And we're both going along, and there's this good bump just ahead, and you come sort of flying in, and I'm sort of coming. We're both looking at the same bump, and you just get ahead of me and just sort of drop into this bomb. And I'm like, could pump it over. Oh, there's probably one behind. I went the one behind, and that was the moment I lost the race. I feel like, because you just got over it and just sort of, it shot you like, you only get those good bumps, especially on the smaller foil. You just like hold the speed for a long time, and just like you just sort of stretched out, and it was like went from us on the same bump to probably 5 bumps in front, and the one behind that I went for was just a fizzer. It just did nothing, and I'm like, man, okay, and it's moving quick, and it sort of, and then it was that was kind of it, and then we got to the reef at Kanaha, and Andrew Gibbons started coming flying in, and I'm like, oh man, everyone's just flying past me now. And you took like the inside line, like pumping that was a pretty good test for you to test the low end of that foil, because you were not in the bumps for probably like a good K, like wind at your back.
Yeah, it felt like a long time.
Yeah, but pumping a lot. And Andrew and I were sort of on the outside, and you probably saw it pretty good, Oscar. What line were you on coming in?
So Andrew was in the bump in front of me when we went off the start. Yeah. And I kind of got into where he was, and he came in and like cut me off pretty hard.
Oh,
and it was one of those ones like, I know, like I was like, he kind of had it, like it was, he was a little in front, so I was like, yeah, no, that's all good. But like, it also just fired me, and he went right and started cutting out so hard. Yeah. So I just kind of was like, yes, I put my head down and was like, I'm just going straight, and I ran way too far inside. And I kind of like ended up having to cut out a bit. And by the end, like I didn't know where the finish was. I kind of knew where that first lifeguard tower was. I'd done a couple runs to there, but I didn't know where the second one was. Mm-hmm. And at that stage, like kind of you guys, like you could see everyone apart from Andrew, who was so much wider. Like you could see you guys ahead, and Kai was kind of in between, and me and Jeffrey as well was there. Yeah. And so I just ended up kind of going, I'm just following these guys. Like they're going to know, like Kai and Jeffrey know this reef like the back of their hand. Yeah. And like this run. So I was like, it's my best bet to just sit with them and then try to make a move. And Kai was probably a little in front, that I kind of knew running inside, like he was going to hold that gap at least, whereas Jeffrey was close enough that it was going to be a bit of a battle between us. And I saw Jeffrey go down probably just outside the reef, or probably just inside the reef. Kind of got that, like once you got inside the reef, it got a little bit wobbly. Yeah. There was a lot going on in there, and it was kind of hard to read him. And I think he just breached, and kind of he paddled up pretty quick after it, but kind of I could hold that, I guess, to the finish. But then I didn't realize it was a beach sprint finish. So like they kind of go, come around the yellow buoy. So like I got around the yellow buoy, and I was like, got in just behind Kai, and I was like, oh, sick, like stoked with that. And I'm walking up the beach, and like they're all like, we can take your board. And I was like I still have my leash rope on. I was like, no, that's all good. Like, don't worry about it. Like, I can just take it. And then also like Jeffrey flies in, rips his leash off, and just sprints up the beach. And it's like, dude, what are you doing? Like, and then someone just yells and like, fucking get to the finish. And I was like, I just didn't realize. And then I in a panic, I just like threw my board and tried to sprint. I was still attached to the thing, and it just like grabbed, and I was just like, what am I doing? I just like kind of cooked that as well. I was just like, I was so annoyed at that stage, but also like, I think that's the learning thing. Like you guys, like you, especially Jimmy, have like done all these sup races. Like you guys understand how the starts work. And it was like the same with M2M. Like I just assumed they like put 2 boats out. We all just paddle out together. And once we're all together, they'll start us. But like everyone was hammering out. And I was like, what are they doing? And then all of a sudden they just, it's just like, They say the race starts at 9:30. It starts on the dot at 9:30. It doesn't matter where you are. Yeah. So learning that was a big learning curve. And then same with the finish. Like you just got to, I mean, I feel like they said finish here, but like you just have to adapt to it. And like you got to be aware of what's going on the whole time around you, which
paddling was a tricky one.
Glad I didn't make those mistakes.
Yeah, paddling was tricky because I thought this, like I actually read the thing online, and it said there's going to be an orange marker and you have to go inside the orange marker. That's what it said online. And we got to the finish, and it's a yellow marker. And I'm looking at like the inside. I'm like, that's like right on the rock wall. Like that's like a rock run. I'm going to damage my foil if I go inside it. So I went outside, and I was coming in, and I was actually pointing. Am I going this way or this way? And I'm trying to get someone to tell me. And I sort of just followed you, Edo. And you, because you hadn't registered, you sort of finished and then just sort of floated off to the side. Yeah. And I was like, oh, it's like I was just like cruising in, and I was like, yeah, it was a good race. Thinking, Edo smashed this. And then everyone's yelling, and I sort of jump off the board. Everyone's yelling, and then they're like, we're gonna run up the beach. I sort of heard that beach, so I ripped my thing off and just like dolphined under and ran up the beach. And I'm thinking, why didn't Edo run up the beach? And then I realized afterwards because you're like, I hadn't registered. They maxed out so that people couldn't register, which is why, and you'd flown over. So it was just the way it was. But Andrew was like right behind me, and I don't think anyone actually knew we had to run up the beach. Maybe you did, Edo, but I certainly didn't.
I mean, yeah, they were all screaming at me like, run, and I was like, no, like I'm not registered. And they're like, oh, get out of here then. What are you doing here? Like they probably thought I started before everyone or something and was just messing up the whole race. But it was kind of interesting to see how it all played out. Like not being registered, I had no pressure of anything. Like I just got a plane in the morning before the race and had never done kind of like that finish and that run before. I just went to the beach where the finish was just right before the race and scoped it out. I was like, all right, yeah, whatever. I'll figure it out. Like, I don't even know if like what I'm going to be doing, but I'll just try to get to the finish and avoid the reef. And then I was like so disorganized. I didn't even fill up my water bottles till last minute. Like I asked people if they had extra water because I didn't bring any, but it was cool to see when you have no pressure and you like no pressure to perform, everything seems to line up much better. Like you're just in a better mental state where nothing even matters. And you're just like focused on the race and yeah, no pressure. So in the M2O, I felt like all the races before were kind of irrelevant because they worked up to the M2O, but that's just the big deal. That's what we kind of been training for the whole season. So there was just so much pressure and you had to be on the right mental state where like you need to get good sleep the night before and you need to be aware of everything throughout the whole race. So that's like a big part of the training. It's not just the physical and everything you do before, but it's a lot about the mental and being able to focus and being your own zone.
For sure. Yeah. It's, I was like trying to visualize that finish. That's what I did that with the SUP a lot because the finish line was, so it was, to be honest, that finish was the closest, like that's the closest race I've ever had, like in Molokai by a long shot. Normally it's over by the time you come around China Wall, but I knew it was going to be like that with the foil because the difference between like 1st and 15th coming to China Wall would have only been probably maybe 10 minutes, maybe 12 minutes. And if someone had pumped from the China Wall all the way into the finish, like you're just right there with first place who maybe didn't make it as far. So it was that sort of visualization of how to finish was important. That's why I guess that run we did there, actually, that run, I didn't know because so Perth calls me up and goes, oh, I'm getting the boat out. Do you want to come? I'm like, yeah, sure. And I'm like, okay, so it'll be Perth and Matt Knowledge and it'll be sweet. And then you rock up, I'm like, oh man, the fast guy's here.
No, I had the same thing. I was just first like, oh, what are you doing later? I'm like, I don't know. I'll just cruise by your house and I want to sound my foil and just get things ready. And he's like, yeah, just hop on. And I saw you pull up and I was like, oh shit, like this is it's gonna get competitive,
Yeah.
I was just trying to cruise out there and not think about anything.
Yeah.
But I think it was a beneficial run. Like without that, I probably wouldn't have changed my tail wing and I would have been on even a smaller setup. So
yeah. From the start, it's I think it was really the whole like I learned so much in that month over in Hawaii and on equipment, on like tuning stuff to match the conditions, on going too small can actually make you go slower. Like there was before that, with code, we got a bunch of foils made up and we got sort of 4 sizes made up and we kind of thought we would be using maybe the second smallest and the third smallest, like the middle 2, but we ended up using the 2 biggest for all the races. And we kind of overestimated the speed of the bumps in Hawaii because we hadn't been there for 4 years, and kind of found that even though there's 2 small, the 2 smaller foils were obviously faster when you're on like a good bump. The bigger ones, the average was way better because you're just gliding for longer and not having to pump as much in between. So I know Axis they did a bunch of, I guess, more photos and videos to launch the ART Pro and that sort of last week. And I know Armstrong were testing a bunch of stuff whilst over in Maui, which is, I'm just, to be honest, I'm so stoked that downwind foiling is becoming like a sport, and like the brands like that Axis and Armstrong are like actually making foils that are designed for these downwind races, which like 4 years ago, it just wasn't. Like, it was this, Kai was on a prototype, Jeffrey was on a prototype, and no one else could use those foils. And now, you know, the ART Pros are coming out, and I'm sure Armstrong are going to come out with the foil used, Oscar, because it obviously worked. And we've got our foils at Code coming out, and, you know, we've kind of got like this, it's like the framework is there for it to be a sport, which, you know, didn't seem to be the case even 18 months ago.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, so that's the amount of development that goes on. Sorry, in the lead up is nuts. Like, you spend so much time kind of like trying to develop gear and work on gear, but like once you have a true just time crunch to get it done by, so much happens. Like, the foil that I ended up using in the race, I think it was 3 to 4 days before M2O. Like, I hadn't even ridden it, and it was a radically different section. And we couldn't, like, we were like, oh, let's try and, like, we're looking at shipping it. Like, it wasn't going to, like, didn't matter what it was going to arrive in time. So we ended up getting one of the guys from the factory to fly out with them. And it was just like, you know, ultimately 3 days out, I probably would have rather just been resting. So I ended up on the way over to Molokai, we did the M2M channel, and sort of, it was a good test because it like got it into some proper bumps. I often find like the Maliko is hard to test gear because it's not really the quickest run. You know, the swell seems to stack, and it doesn't. I think when you get big swells, which since I've been here, we just haven't had swells, so it's been hard to kind of test the top end of foils. And that's where getting a run in on that M2M a couple of days before was good, just to get a feeling on the top end. But it's just, there was so much gear getting developed. Everyone was just like scoping out everyone else's gear. There was so much going on. But I think, like you said, Jimmy, just having brands backing this as a sport, and like this, the gear development that's happened, it's just nuts. Like, it's crazy how much quicker we're going than we were in the past. And I remember when I learned to downwind, like just over a year and a half ago, we were chatting about it. And I think I was listening to all your podcasts, and everyone's like, don't hunt swells. Like, you can't hunt swells. You got to be hunting like the wind bumps and finding the link. And like, all of a sudden, like, to look at it now, like that channel, like the wind bumps were irrelevant. You never even looked at them. You were just hunting swell. And that's because like the gear development, like that's where our lines through the bumps are totally different to what we were doing. And it's all because of the gear. And it's just crazy how much quicker we're going now.
Yeah. I also think this trip especially has kind of, to me, drawn a line in the sand, and you're either going for speed or you're going to surf. And when you're learning, I think it's definitely easier to surf downwind than it is to go for speed, because going for speed, you put yourself in some pretty bad spots. Like, up and overs is a really bad thing to be doing when you're learning, because you're going to stall out, you know, when you're learning and having to go fast and straight the whole time. It's look, it can be easier if the bumps are good, but if the bumps aren't good and the conditions are a bit shittier, then surfing and sort of staying with the one bump you're on is always going to be the more efficient way to do it in terms of like energy saving. But the race lines, and Edo, I know Edo actually signed up to the Coach Casey Club like probably 2 or 3 months ago. And I was like, I was watching it. I remember seeing you, we spoke, and you're like, just sign up. And I was like, and you uploaded a video of you paddling up the 899, and it like, and there's like, I've got on my course, like how to go fast and how to go slow. And it's like sort of one thing. And it was funny, actually for M2M especially. So there's 2 things going through my mind when I saw you go flying past me on the outside. I see Edo, who's using the Axis ART Pro that I helped develop with Axis. Mm-hmm. And I'm thinking, man, he's on that foil. I know it goes fast. And then I'm thinking, and I freaking taught him to, or helped him paddle up. Not that I taught you doing it already, but I'm like, I gave him those like little tips. And I'm like, maybe I got to sort of, filter out who can sign up.
That's funny. But because I felt like I was good on the downwinding side, but it's really important to be able to paddle up a small foil as well, because that's what gets you going. Like, that's why also I feel like you guys realize longer boards are kind of what works in Hawaii, because with a shorter board, you wouldn't be able to paddle up. I mean, you guys are beasts, but for a lot of people, it's harder to paddle up small foils that are what makes you go fast in these conditions.
For sure.
So it's so important. Yeah.
Yeah. I was literally a year ago, I was using a 6'3" by 21. That was my long race board. That was my long skinny race board.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think I'd like maybe it was like August, September last year. I think it was a 6'6" by like 18 or 19. And I'm like, oh, this is easy to get up, but it's a bit clunky once up. And then in November, I got a 6'10" by 18. And that was like, oh, this is way better for getting up and going. And now I'm on a 7'6" by 18, which is like, the change of equipment. And I'm not sure if Oskar, if you went back from your 7'7" to your 7'0", did you do that? Did you try your 7'0"?
I haven't tried it since, only because once I got on the 7'7", I made the call that I needed to go longer. I didn't jump back just because I didn't want to get used to it. Insane. Like, it's an interesting thing. I've been talking to a bunch of guys about it lately, and I think, board design went so narrow and so long. And I think, if I look back at what I'd ride on a downwind run, even these days, like, I don't need to be able to flat water start a 600 square centimeter area wing. Like, it's for me, that just means the board's way too big already. I mean, obviously for these very specific races, I'll choose a board like that. But like, dude, once I'm going home, I'm like, I was talking to Army about it the other day. I was like, I want to make like a 5'6" or a 5'7", like something that it's just enough that I can get up a wing that will suit those conditions. But if I can flat water start it and pump it all the way out, it's already too big of a board. Do you know what I mean? And I think, I've been saying that so much now. I'm like, dude, I'm just looking forward to doing a downwind run where I don't need to go straight and fast. Like, ride a small board and just like do some turns and cruise. Like, it has been a month of just everyone training, doing the same. It's gone straight and fast. And I'm just like, it's been such a narrow-minded kind of foiling month. Whereas I'm just like, oh, I want to go winging again. I want to go do this again, prone, all that sort of stuff. I'm just looking forward to that. And also working on boards. Like, I think, like, don't get me wrong, those longer, narrow boards give people a great, it's a much easier learning curve to get up. Like, it's easier to paddle those boards up. Like, and if you're not getting on foil, like, there's no point. You may as well, like, you got to be getting on foil. But now, like, paddling up such small foils in the flats, like, they're just kind of, I think, have gone too far and they're a little bit too long and narrow. But yeah, I mean, it's the same as when we did that. I think we had that downwind run. Maybe it was after M2M. There was probably like 20 of us on it. Kind of when everyone started arriving in Maui, and it was just, we were all back on kind of smaller boards and kind of just riding what we'd like to ride. And it was just, that was kind of more that was an epic run. Like, just to see so many guys. I think Kane was on like maybe a 6.0. Like, everyone was on like back onto the smaller boards. So, and it was kind of that, you just see the turning and the lines you can draw with a smaller board is, I'm definitely in favor of going smaller again now, but I do see the advantage of the longer boards for sure. So
the reason you say that, and I totally agree, the smaller boards turn better, but when you go, like, I went back to one of my like 6'10" boards the other day. When I was over here still, when I was in Sydney, before I went and I had my 7'6" and my 6'10", I was testing them out. Went back to my 6'10". It is so much harder, and like, you learn to paddle. You learn to paddle the bigger one up, and you think, oh yeah, that didn't feel that much easier, but it's a little bit easier. You go back to your old board, and it's like, how did I ever paddle this up? It's probably the best training you can do. And using a big board for race day is probably a great thing to do. But using your small board after using a big board is like, it's rattling. Like, it's like, how would I ever manage to paddle these things up? It's crazy. So I totally agree that shorter, even slightly wider boards, I feel like you can turn that little bit, like instead of 18, like 20. Like, 20 wide is more fun to turn, I feel like. But send me a message when you paddle up your 7.0 again at Oscar. I reckon you'll be rattled. It's heavy. Yeah, it's actually is this foil? I got to check the foil, and it's like, whoa.
Yeah. I'd always kind of be scared of like going small, but I mean big. Sorry, I was always like, oh yeah, like that board's way too big. It's just not going to work. And then you kind of see people using it, and it got normal. And then when I eventually tried a big board, I was like, wait, this isn't actually that bad. Like, you're not giving up on that much of turning and maneuverability and pumping like I thought you would, just because like the boxes are further forward. So like a lot of the board is behind the box and you don't even see it. But yeah, I thought it would have been a lot worse. So I'm surprised that they still turn and pump. But at the same time, yeah, it's so much more fun to be able to turn and just, feel the board on your feet instead of it having its own momentum, just going straight.
Actually, I remember you asking me, Edo, like before, probably in June, early June, you're like, hey, how long is your board? And I'm like, I think I got like 7.6. You're like, yeah, I got 7.62. I feel like that's long enough. I'm like, I think it's long enough. But then obviously you got you got the 8.6, and
that was so last minute. I was so lucky to be able to find someone that had one and was able to sell it in time. Just because that's where, like, without that board, I probably wouldn't have been able to paddle up on any of those small foils, just because it makes it so much easier.
Yeah, and I remember you uploaded a few videos of yourself paddling up. I think it was in Hong Kong, and we're like going into detail on like technique to sort of help you get up and going. And did the board like fix most of that, or was my advice any help?
Yeah, no, your advice definitely helped a lot. I remember one of the biggest pivot points was going for a shorter paddle so I could get more strokes in.
Yeah.
And that kind of unlocked a lot. But then, it's still really physically demanding to paddle up on those small foils. And the biggest change was when I went up on that big board. I tried it side by side by like 100-liter board and a 90-liter board that were both like 8 feet long. And this one's 8.6 and 125. And I was just like, I can really struggle to get up on those small foils. I can still do it, but it takes up so much energy that by the time you're up and pumping, like you can only pump for, I don't know, a minute or maybe 2 minutes, but on that big board, you still have so much energy and you can go for so much longer.
Yeah.
So that was the biggest thing.
Yeah. That's what I feel like, length and width are getting most attention in terms of like people buying boards, but I think volume and weight are ones that people probably don't look into enough. I think volume, there's a volume, like last year I was using 85-liter boards, like same, like neutral volume pretty much. And I was pretty much underwater, and I'd take a few strokes to get up onto the water and then I'd do my start. I went up to 90 liters like 6 months ago, and then literally like a month before the race, I got a 100-liter board. And the difference from 90 to 100 for me, so 10 liters plus volume to 20 liters plus volume, was huge. Like it made such a big difference. But also the weight, I got this board made up super light, and it was like maybe 500 grams lighter than the board, maybe 600 grams lighter than the board I had. And the combination of the more volume with less weight was it was huge. It was a big difference for sure. It's sort of annoying because you make a board light and it's not going to last as long, it's,
right.
But
at the same time, don't you feel like if you had more weight, like as long as the weight's right on the boxes, right on top of the foil, and you can still pump and maneuver it fine, I feel like sometimes more weight going down the bumps would give you more momentum and like more speed to go up and over, right?
Yeah. So it depends on what the conditions are. So if it's light, like Molokai was, like so if you M to M, like put like an extra 2 liters of water in your backpack and just sort of go as fast as you can, whereas M to O, I was like trying to drink I had 3 liters of water and I was drinking as much as I could. And I remember coming into just before you guys I saw you guys, I'd finished all my water and I'm like, perfect. I'm going to be as light as I can be for the upwind pump. Whereas with like a race like Maliko or M2M, if you get on a good bump and you're that little bit, like Dave Kalama's the perfect example. When he's in the middle of the channel, like he's probably the quickest guy going around because he's a bit heavier and he can hold onto those bumps for so long. Whereas, probably us three are probably a bit more agile in the smaller bumps and sort of maneuvering around. Whereas in the big bumps, we're probably going to lose a little bit to the bigger guys just because momentum, like you said. Just that little bit. Actually, okay, what sort of paddles were we using? So I was using like an 85. It was a code paddle. It's got a bit of a scoop in it. It feels bigger than what it is, but I kind of like the 85's considered small now in this day and age, but more cadence, less power, I guess. It's got a fair bit of grunt for an 85, but it's less power than like a, Ono Ava that Andrew Gibbon was using, the 115.
I was on a Ono Ava 105.
Yeah.
So I think it also depends on like how much flotation you have under your feet. Like wouldn't you want a smaller blade on a less floaty board just because you need to get it up to speed?
For sure.
And then with a more floaty board, you can just have a bigger blade because it'll just glide right away, right?
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah. What were you using, Oscar?
Yeah, I was with the PPC, which is same as the Ono Evo 105. I definitely feel like, because I don't have a paddle background, I could kind of rely less on technique, more on power, which I think power is probably easier to come by when you're learning than technique. I mean, I think it still doesn't replace technique, but it is a little easier. But then if you've got good technique and a fast cadence, you can definitely go to a smaller blade. It's probably more advantageous to go to a smaller blade. But yeah, for me, I had to do a lot of work on the flat water start leading up to this because I knew it was going to be a flat start, and the bigger blade, it was easier for me definitely to kind of just muscle and pull the board out of the water. Yeah. I'd say you've obviously got that such a strong stroke and such a high cadence, same as Kai, which Kai was on an Ono waiver as well, I think. Just a painted up one.
Yeah, I didn't. He's secretive. I know he was on an Axis.
Yeah.
Actually, we should talk about that just quickly before we finish, but we'll talk about it later. But we'll stick with the paddles. I remember I did a run with Andrew. We did a Palale run, and we put all the paddles in the back, and my paddle was next to his, and my paddle was like this, and Andrew's was like this. He was just like this monster blade. I'm like, are we doing the same sport, Andrew? He's like, yeah, you paddle a bit more than me. I need every bit I can get. So I think technique, you can make a small paddle work, and the cadence is like makes up for the power. But I think the main thing is you just got to get used to whatever you're using. A lot of people, I get a lot of questions on what paddle people what paddle should I get? And they said, how high should I cut it, and what size blade, and flexing the shaft and whatnot. And I've seen heaps of people paddle up with super flexy blades, super flexy shafts and really big blades. And then other people paddle up with super stiff shafts and small blades and everything in between, from like a hand span over the head to like eyebrow height. And they all work, and there's pros and cons to everything, but you just got to dial in to your equipment. You just got to learn what works for you. And there's techniques that'll work better for some and some things and worse for other things. But technique, I'm big on like working that technique because I've got that stand-up paddle background. But I've certainly seen some people do better with a bigger blade than a smaller blade if they change nothing else. But if you work on your technique, you can get both the bigger blade and the smaller blade working better than you can without the good technique. So yeah, it's an interesting one.
Yeah.
What else we talk about? We were So I was lucky enough to sit down and chat with Kai. I went down to his place and, after M2M, and we organised it before the race. And then afterwards, I was kind of a bit like, he came in fifth and I got him right at the line. I was like, I wonder how this chat's going to go. But he was super, super friendly and welcoming, and it was kind of cool to, we talked a bit about gear, and he'd had created that company, the Hydrofoil company, which is basically just him making customs for racing essentially, and sort of, I guess, he said indefinitely paused for now. And I was asking, well, what foils are you using? And he said he's got the Phantom. And there was that video that Kahi did talking about the space memory carbon.
Oh yeah.
Like through the camera.
That was funny.
Was that all a wind up? I wanted to know. I had a feeling it was all just a wind up.
100%.
And I was like,
it was.
Yeah, 100%. Good.
Yeah, it was that funny though. I remember I sent it to the boys when I first saw it. I said, I'm pretty sure this is a piss take, but still pretty interesting. And then after M2M, he talked about how his foils have really good top end, but not such good low end. And then he does heaps of testing between M2M and Paddle Moor, and gets beaten by Edo, myself, and Andrew. So he comes fourth. And then after that, he swaps to Axis gear. I'm not sure what size foil he used, but Edo might have a better idea. But I remember speaking to you, Edo, and I'm like, dude, what's going on? You're like, you can say that.
No, I was just like, you kind of keep visualizing this race that you're training towards, and like who you're going to be competing with. And you just keep thinking about that. And then it kind of threw me off when I realized Kai was going to be using the same foil as me. And I was like, oh shit, like, he's going to beat me. It's Lenny. He's going to destroy me on my same foil. Cause I put a lot of trust in like what I ride and, I had this foil I was going to ride the whole time. And I knew, and I like think that it's super fast, but if someone's riding the same foil, especially if it's Lenny, that got me really worried. And it kind of started getting to my head. And that's like, your headspace has to be right when you race. So, I was just really worried, and it really, and it felt good when we got to the finish and I asked him, bro, what were you riding? And he was like, basically he said he was riding the exact same tail wing, the exact same fuse and everything the same. And I was like, oh, wow. Like that put a lot of confidence on me because, that's what I was worried about the whole time.
Yeah. No, and I think I said to you after, I'm like, mate, that's huge.
Yeah.
You had no advantage or disadvantage between you and Kai. And I remember at the chat, I spoke to the boys after, I'm like, oh, should we offer Kai a foil? And they're like, no way, we're backing you, Jimmy. They're like, keep your advantage to yourself. And I was like, yeah, it'd be good marketing though. They're like, yeah, happy for you to put our trust in you. And I remember when I sent you a message when I saw Kyle all the foils, and I was like, oh, what do you reckon, Edo? And you were like, oh, pretty heavy.
Yeah. It didn't feel too good, but it ended up going the best way it could.
Yeah.
Sure. It would have sucked if he beat me, and that just that would have threw me off the podium. And I'm like, oh, damn it. Like that could have been me, but ended up working good.
Yeah. It worked out. Yeah. And I guess there's personally, I felt that all the foils were ballpark, like similar, and then it depended on what foil you chose for the day and how you set it up and how used to it you were. I found for myself the biggest sort of breakthrough in equipment came, like I said, that using that slightly bigger foil and not losing too much in the big bumps, and having that extra bit, being able to paddle up in the flat and being able to pump in the flat. So it seemed to me that like compared to, I guess, 2019, it just seemed like the biggest arms race. Everyone was just like, Jeffrey had the fastest foil and Kai was trying to catch up to him. And it was literally a battle between those two. I did a race, I think it was 2018. I did a Molokai race and I was riding the Molokai 200 from Go Foil because it wasn't that windy a day, and I was a bit heavy for the Eva. And I remember I got up off the start and like first or second off the start, I'm like, oh, sweet, I'm in with the shot. And then before I even got to Who Keeper, like 20 people flew past me, like I wasn't moving. And it was just like, I remember when I got a Who Keeper, I'm like, all right, I'm just going to go out wide. I'm just going to surf because it's like, it's not going to make a difference how hard I try to go fast. I'm not on the pace today. And it's cool to me. That shows the evolution of sport, that all the brands are making foils and we're all getting to that sort of point, pointy end at the moment anyway, of what I feel like we're maxing out the speed of the bumps, and Paddler Mill was a pretty good example of that. Unless it was like maybe one or two special bumps that you could have got a bit of a gap, but otherwise everyone was pumping up and over bumps, and we're all going faster than the bumps. And that means the equipment's working really well to me, and that it's becoming less of an arms race now because all the foils are in that ballpark, and it comes down to skill, how well you know your equipment, how well you know the conditions, and matching fitness, how good your legs are, and it's becoming more of a sport now rather than just this, who can ride the fastest foil, which to me is it's so exciting, so cool to have it like that, rather than Kai was trying to out equipment someone by changing all the gear and stuff, and he couldn't, which that's important to me anyway. It shows that we're all pretty much even playing field, and from there go race, boys, rather than one person having this magic foil and not being possible. Pretty cool.
I think it makes the racing more interesting. Just even that's the thing, like if you can get everyone on a foil that's competitive, then it becomes down to the rider, and that's kind of a more interesting thing than just so-and-so had the fastest foil. And there's it makes it more accessible as well. Like that's the hard thing as well. Like as much as we're on prototypes for these races, you still want it to be accessible to everyone to kind of see where they're at. And that's why, you know, I'm stoked that everyone's kind of releasing these wings. It helps the development of the sport, but also just get everyone on them and see, you know, it's kind of a sick idea. Like you watch, say, F1, and it's like, you're never going to drive a Red Bull F1 car as much as you watch the sport. Whereas this, it's like month out when these wings also get released, it's like, it'd be pretty sick. Like, dude, I got to ride what Jimmy rode. Like, that's sick. Like, I can feel what he felt and actually like compare and see what everyone's riding. And I think it's just a cool sport with so much development. And as much as like every year I keep saying, you're like, we've got to be hitting like that plateau. And it's just like these last foils we've got, I'm just like, we are nowhere near like the rate and the way things have evolved. Like, we're nowhere near the top of this. There is so much more to come, which is epic.
Yeah.
So cool to see.
It's crazy. And yeah, like I said, like we seem like we're getting close to that, but I think there's still gains to be made. I truly believe that in terms of the design, but I think it's going to come down to like, I think we're going to get more efficient, not necessarily more faster, more speed, because I felt like, especially that paddle and wheel race, I was like, I couldn't have gone any quicker than that, except if I got that bump that you got, Edo, and that was the difference to me. There was no way I could have like irked any more out of like, I wasn't using too big a foil, I wasn't using too small a foil. I was just like, we're all going for it. And it was, the only way I could have gone quicker is if the conditions were bigger. And that's kind of cool. You know, it's most of the time conditions aren't bombing for races. It just seems to be that way, you know, and I'm sure in the month it was, at least you must have been through the same for you guys, but every time I raced, my splits were the slowest.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And then all the training runs, it was like, man, I'm going like, you know, sub twos on a couple, and it was like, yeah, sick. And then you do the race, and like, I remember looking at the splits from M to M, and I'm like doing like a lot of the race, I was doing like 220s to 230s, and like for the training runs, it was like, and I came fourth in that, and it's like, well, everyone mustn't be going that much faster because I was in the mix. And so and that was one of the reasons I went for the bigger foil for M2O, because it's earlier start and the start and the finish, but it's like we were going a lot quicker in all the training runs we were doing than any other race, it seemed like to me, all month. Crazy the way the wind almost, because M2O was a light year this year. Every day around it was honky.
Oh.
Yeah, was it? Yeah.
You get down the day before, and I was like, look at this start. I was like, we're going to be flying. And you get there on race morning, it's like to the horizon, you can't see a white cap, and you're like, what are we going to do?
Yeah.
And I was the same. I think because the current was moving up. I can't remember which way the current goes, and it felt slow either way. Like, I felt like we're finding good bumps and like holding with them, but splits were slow. And so, I mean, I don't know what the current was doing, so that kind of factors in. So whereas I think Maliko probably doesn't have as much current. You kind of just, if you got a good day at Maliko, it's a good kind of test. But out in the channels, I just felt like everything felt slow. It was kind of like, it didn't feel slow riding, but the numbers were always slow.
Yeah. You almost didn't want to look at your watch. It was like,
oh. It was disheartening. It was just go. Just go.
Yeah. Well, why don't we, I reckon it'd be probably beneficial for people that are listening for us all to sort of rattle off like 2 or 3 things we learnt from the month that was downwind month. So maybe Edo, what did you learn in the racing and equipment and all that sort of stuff?
I feel like I need a second to think about that. Why don't Oscar, you go first?
Put him on the spot. Yeah, Oscar, you go now.
Yeah.
Oh, mine was super easy because M2M was my first race. I was 500-600 meters upwind and inside when the gun went off. Like, I just cooked that. Like, you've got to be right out with the furthest guys and staying with them. Like, guys were hammering. Like, you have to be out there at the start line. Like, that was an easy one to learn. I think, same as finish. I cooked the start on that one. I cooked the finish on the next one.
Actually, talk about the finish on that one, because actually you said before that you felt like you were a bit sort of under the radar. And I remember I spoke to you after M2M, you're like, man, I fell off 3 times at the start, and then I came in and I hit the reef. And I remember looking back at the results, and I'm like, Oscar was like, if he stuffed the finish and stuffed the start, he was right on the pace. I remember we did a run with you and we went for a bit of speed at the start. And I'm like, Oscar's right there. But what happened at the finish on that race, M2M?
M2M, I went way too far south. And then the problem was like I kind of, because I paddled up so bad, I had to work through the field, and I kind of got to a point where kind of got through everyone, and you guys were kind of upwind and also further right. And so I kind of just went, all right, I'm going to put my head down for 20 minutes and kind of just go hard. And I kind of went a little too straight and kind of all of a sudden I looked up and I couldn't see a single person or boat. And I was just like, I don't fully know where I'm going. I know I'm going right around the bottom of Molokai. So I kind of turned right, and everyone just goes like, oh, one, you'll see the Kamalo buoy, big red buoy. And I was like, never saw that.
Yeah.
And everyone goes, all right, you can't miss the pier. Like, it's a big gray building on the end of the pier, like just cut in for that. And that was kind of like, I realized I went too far deep and I just saw a gray building on the shoreline. I started cutting all the way up to it. And I think I must have come in because I saw Kai and his boat. So I think you must have been there as well. I kind of saw them and was like, all right, I think I'm on the right line now. And I kind of straightened out. But by that stage, I just cut so aggressively because I just assumed that was the finish.
Mm-hmm.
So I ended up going too far in, sort of straightened up my line. And I think once you get around the corner, that's much more just like the swell's a little bit further out and running down. You kind of just, everything stacks up. You kind of like Halalimua, you end up just, everyone's pretty similar. You're not really gaining on anyone. You're not really losing. So I think I came down somewhere halfway along that run, and same thing, I think Tom or someone caught up to me and he didn't know the way as well. So he just ran inside, and just the bumps got smaller and smaller and smaller. And eventually he just came down, and I was like, oh shit. Like, I kind of just put all my eggs on just chasing him.
Yeah.
So then I had to pump way out wide. I think I was right before that kind of reef on the corner where you come around and finish. And I just pumped straight. Like, I was so cooked. Like, I just pretty much was pumping in the flats to get around that reef. And eventually there was a little bump coming across. I'm like, I have to catch it. Like, I was just so cooked, and I just dry docked myself on the reef, like walked across the whole reef in like knee-high water. Like, it was complete kook shot. I was just like, I was so annoyed, but also just like, just so much to learn. Like, you've got to study the maps. You've got, like, you see guys like Kane and Andrew, they've got their phones on them. They're pulling out the phones, and they've got like the thermometry. They're looking at where their line is. They know exactly what's going on.
Yeah.
So after that, like, that was probably a big learning curve. Like, whether you're taking a watch, like, you need to have something that can tell you, you got to plan your line, and you've got to have something that can tell you how far off your line you are and if you're tracking in the right direction, and kind of knowing your distances, like, you know, how far along that route you are and everything like that. Like, that knowledge is key. Like, obviously you gain that knowledge with doing the races, but they're pretty expensive, and they're, you know, they happen once a year. They're not things that you can go and practice. Like, you need an Escort boat to do those runs. It's not like, oh yeah, you just go and do it on a Sunday afternoon. Like, you get one chance almost a year to have a crack at it. So utilizing technology as much as you can to take the correct line, like, you just got to do, really.
Yeah, sure. And also the line for your strategy is important too, you know, because if you're on a bigger foil for M2M, for example, you might be better on the inside, whereas if you're in a smaller foil, you definitely want to be outside. I remember I saw Edo fly past me M2M twice. He fell off. I thought it was another person.
Yeah.
It was, you flew past me once and just like disappeared, and then I'm like, okay. And then I saw someone else on the yellow board fly past me. I'm like, man, everyone's just like moving past me like I'm not moving. It was just Edo twice.
I also had no idea where I was going into him.
Yeah. I mean, you guys sound like you actually had a better line than I did. I was on the inside, and I was following Kai. Kai and I did like the perfect sup line, but it was for the foil, it's a little bit different, which is cool. What did you learn, Edo? What did you learn this month?
I would say, I mean, in this, like you said, Oscar, like, this was the few times that we these were the first times that we actually raced in big channel crossings like this. So it's not really just about going fast downwind, like what we train for. That's the main focus of everyone. Just like, I want to get the best split, the best average speed, figure out what foil works in what conditions. But it's so much more than that. There's the start, there's figuring out your line, where you're going to go, looking at the currents, looking at, you know, what choice of foil you're going to make. And it's not just the front wing. There's a whole other things and the shims and whatever you can get into. But there's also a big thing for me. The biggest learning was just being in the right mental space, because it's hard to for me, it's always hard to like sleep the night before the race, and sleep makes such a huge deal on your performance because I'm so excited. I'm just thinking about like my heart just starts racing and I'm thinking about how it's going to pan out and I just can't sleep. So I started stretching just before sleep, and that's kind of like calmed me down and helps a lot with the rest of everything. So yeah, the racing is really different from just downwind. There's so many different aspects to look out for.
Yeah, no, for sure. And yeah, that routine's important. There's like you said, it's and like I said before, like the racing seems to always be in less good conditions for two reasons. I think one, that races generally start earlier, and when we're training, you sort of look for that windiest part of the day.
Yeah.
But also just for whatever reason, same as like you put a surf contest on, the surf's going to be shit. you put a downwind race on, the wind's going to be lighter than what it's been, and it seemed to be the case this month anyway, because M2M was kind of light and the wind didn't fill in. Paddle was like the lightest Molokai run I did the whole month, and M2O was the lightest wind of the week. We had still had wind, but it was certainly wasn't a small foil day, except for those K's heading towards China Wall. But yeah, no, it was a pleasure to get a few runs in with you boys, and share a few bumps with you, and I'm just very, very much like a fun and educational month for me. Like just I think going into it, I knew that there was going to be a lot learnt. And then after Paddle and M2M, it felt like there was sort of like a top 5 to sort of, and then maybe an extended sort of top 7 of crew. And probably after, I was kind of thinking Kane, Andrew, Kai, yourself, Edo, me, and then I kind of had Jeffrey and Oskar and Jeffrey as well as kind of like, that's like the 7 that are moving, like really, really going fast. Probably could extend to a few more. Like Tom Constant was going pretty well as well, and I'm sure I've missed someone. But there was a kind of a top 7, like 5 to 7, and then there was like an extended sort of 10 to 12. Eric Sturman was going pretty well too. There was.
I always had Perth. Perth was always a dark horse.
100%.
Yeah, Perth. Yeah.
If he gets up, that dude moves. So I was like, but he's the same. I think he's. The paddling's not his background, and he had a shoulder injury, so he just hadn't been working on any of that stuff. So I think he just never got an opportunity to showcase his speed, but he's like, I've done runs with him at home, and dude moves. So I think hopefully he gets his shoulder in line for next year, and he's feeling good because he'll be a big contender.
Yeah, his speed demon.
And Zane Westwood, dude.
That's what I was actually just thinking this morning. I had a really good race with him over in WA, and we do runs. We used to do runs all the time when we were both living sort of either end of the run. He just moved up to Byron now, but we have always. He's a competitive beast too. Like he picks stuff up so quick. He'll be one to watch. But I actually think this is something that sort of no disrespect to the lift stuff, but I think for Molokai to Oahu, the lift guys were kind of snookered in that 110 or 150, and Andrew was using the 110 in like the other races, and he was super fast. And then I remember I actually spoke to Brady and who else did I speak to? And Dane and they're the lift guys on the freedom boards. And I was like, oh, what foil are you guys using tomorrow? Like, oh, probably the 150. I remember in my head, I'm like, oh, they're not in the race then. It was it's a little bit too big a foil, I felt, for the racing and the speeds we were doing this month. The 110 was right there. But lift should have a 130.
Yeah, for sure.
I thought the 120 might have been a good option, but no one seemed to run it.
No one used it.
It's not as high aspect as the 110 and the 150. Yeah, it does. They're totally different foils, like the 150 versus the 110. And I think, like you said, it's a tricky one to balance in between. And those guys tend to be bigger guys. So like the 110, you can get up in the bumps, but no one's getting that up in the flats and pumping it.
Oh, and
a few kilometers out.
Pump that whole
even
way.
getting it out.
Yeah, the M2O finish was always going to be a bit tricky for anyone on a 110 as well. Like that thing's it was. And yeah, Andrew certainly showed how quick he can go, but he's a great. Do you guys know what happened for the finish actually for M2O? So Kai got fourth.
Yeah.
But he pumped a fair way, I think. He got a fair way in because Andrew was a fair way in front from what I heard before that. I want to get those boys on to get the debrief.
Yeah, I assume Andrew, mate. I didn't hear. I thought Andrew was probably going to be the fourth guy through. And being on the 150, I assume he'd make it a long way through.
Yeah.
But I mean, Kai, Kai knows that stretch of reef pretty well. He's got such a good read on the energy out there. He was going to suck every bit of energy he could. So you kind of knew if he was going to come through, he was going to make it a long way in.
Well, you saw what he did.
Yeah, I don't know what happened after that.
Yeah.
I think Andrew just got pretty unlucky with how the waves came through. Like, you kind of need to get lucky and get a set to go through the whole way, even when you're on a bigger foil. But if there's nothing to work with, you just have the wind in your face the whole way. So it's like,
yeah,
you just go down.
Yeah, and that's what I had. Like I had the one at China Wall that I eventually did get, but it was a shitty one, and I just I didn't even get to. I literally didn't even get to pillars, and then I was kind of almost lucky enough that by the time I'd paddled to pillars, the set had come, and that was realistic. And then I heard Kai got the perfect set coming around the reef actually by one of my mates who was escorting. He said Kai came around and just on a bomb. He's just like the wave. He's like wave of the day. He's just like in tune with the ocean. And then he got all fair way in. What a ruthless actually. What do you guys think for the finish? Next year they're talking about a different finish. A few people in like the Coach Casey club sort of said to me the best part was the finish because you couldn't really at the start it was kind of like Oskar and I and then Edo you were catching up, but it was if the race had finished at China Wall it would have been they said it would have been boring, which I was like
right. I don't know.
I don't think it would have been boring.
In the situation, I want it boring. When I look back, it was sick. It was so it was a battle. Like that was kind of the cool part of it as well. Like, say you look at paddling, it was like where everyone got up, it kind of everyone finished. It wasn't it's not that interesting. It wasn't like who took this line, who came down, or there was no battles really going on.
No.
And so that's where I've heard, different things, people saying going past Diamond Heads and doing the full run coming into Waikiki. Some people said finishing where the wingers will finish. And I think the wingers maybe like at the start of the channel, like that's a fairly, it's a brutal finish, but it's still makeable.
Yeah.
Pretty comfortably, even if you get a bad luck. But I mean, paddling for 35 minutes, just, if you that's roughly say the paddle from China Walls all the way in is roughly a 35-minute paddle, which that's a long time. Like that's more than a quarter of the channel crossing. Like I think we would have made it probably to the wall within under 2 hours. Actually, don't know.
I think we would have. Yeah.
Ballpark, we were under 2 hours, and then to have a 35-minute paddle where it's just so many variables on it, catching a set, and like there's just too many variables that are kind of outside of a racing kind of stamp. Yeah, it's just nothing you can like train for, or you can practice that approach, but there's luck that comes into it and all that. And it's like I see both sides. Like, I'm into the whole like having a race that's got ups and downs, but also like it's tricky ones. Yeah. It's got to be fair as well. So I'm kind of open to it. Like as much as everyone kind of said it's a brutal paddle, like realistically, it's surprising how far you can make it. Like it sounds, 2 miles of headwind, like it sounds brutal, but it is crazy how, for the better riders, having a good read on it, trying to suck every little bit of energy out of it, like you can make it a long way. And I think, kind of fun. I don't know. I lost to it as well, so I probably should say that it sucks and I don't want to into the wall, but I don't know. It was just like that was what made it the race that it was that it was up and down. Like if I kind of went off the start, stayed out and won, it's like it'd be interesting, but I was like, okay, whatever. But the way it ended was what made it so good. So
to me, Molokai to Oahu has always been like it's an ocean race, not so much a downwind race. So I think whatever the changes they make, I think there needs to be that sort of varied conditions. So the start makes it very different to all the other races. And I personally, I think that's important. I think, but they've got to balance up I guess the legacy of the race, as well as getting people to do it, like participation wise. Because if it's this impossible race that's got a hideous start and a hideous finish, maybe you're only going to get 20 elite people sign up. I think for the growth of the sport, it's important that people want to do the race and that it is still hard, but it's doable. And I think at the moment it's probably, like I know like Dave Klarmer has never even thought about doing it because the finish is just not fun, and I think they've got to balance that up. What do you reckon, Edo? You're local to Oahu, so it's kind of...
I mean, everyone has different perspectives, and some people want to do the finish that way because they say, it's a channel crossing. Like, we're going to go from here, from this island to this island. This is what the race has always been like, and that's how it should be. And then there's other people that are like, well, we're here to downwind foil. Let's downwind foil. That's like, that paddling is not a component of it. And I mean, you could agree with either side, but I think at the end of the day, like, whatever they change the race to be, we're going to make our own different decisions. Probably if we're not going to be paddling headwind, we're going to all be riding smaller boards and going faster throughout the channel and smaller wings. So we're just we're going to ride differently, but anyways, you can always adapt to what it's like. And yeah, I think it also kind of evens out the playing field, like having that flat, those different conditions throughout, just because you can go faster out the channel, but then you're going to have to pump. And it just makes it a little bit more even for everyone.
Yeah.
But either way, we're going to adapt to it anyways. So I don't think it matters that much.
Yeah, no, I agree. It definitely, it's not that important. To me, I was chatting to a mate of mine who's sort of helping for next year, and he was saying they were talking about the Blinker Boy or the Outrigger Club. And I reckon both are good options. Personally, I think I'd prefer to go the Outrigger than the Blinker Boy, just because.
For sure.
Just because it'd be pretty cool to finish. Like, it's a bit more of a spectacle for spectators, finishing at the Blinker Boy, you're like literally there and you just, I guess you just paddle in, and whereas if you were to finish at the Outrigger, you could have be pretty sick.
Spectators,
yeah.
Hype, yeah.
I think
that's a cool part of it too.
I think that to keep it like the legacy of the race, I think it'd be important that you had to go around a marker at China Wall. I think that'd make it pretty cool. So you still have that sort of have to cut into China Wall, and instead of going in from there, you actually turn, so you get a wave at the point and then turn left. That'd be to me a pretty, you base it on a Hawaii Kai run. That'd be pretty cool, I think. Another thing I sort of was looking at when I was at Waikiki and I was staying in one of those hotels, it's glassy, but all the swells that sort of wrap in to Queens, it's very foilable, especially on a downwind wing, to be able to get all the way into the heart of Waikiki. And I think to finish a race at Queens would be unbelievable.
Oh, that'd be unbelievable, yeah.
And there's people it'd be the Outrigger would be sick, but just go that little bit extra gives it a little bit more of that sort of there's no wind, but there's definitely waves. And to have the crowd factor would be, it'd be messed up. It'd be pretty sick.
Yeah, for sure.
To me, I think that's if you had to go to China Wall and then turn down and you finished at Queens, that'd be pretty cool. And it'd showcase the sport to hundreds of thousands of tourists. But it'd be pretty, you'd have a crowd, which would be, pretty cool, rather than paddling in on your stomach across the finish line. People not even knowing if you have a foil on underneath or if you're in the prone division, Yeah.
Yeah, it's probably the worst showcase of our sport is that finish, us just paddling in the slowest effectively of the crossing. The prone guys are on 12, they're just going way past us. Everyone is. Yeah. And we're just battling in. It's we started we made a 2-hour crossing. It's
you wouldn't know it.
I don't know. It didn't feel right. I was it just did not showcase the sport. But I'm frothing on the idea of coming into China Walls to a marker and then punch back out with the wind. You're being flat, almost flat water again.
Yeah.
Kind of like the start. You got a wind behind.
It's like a reset
with it.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I rate that. That sounds like a pretty, and if you come down there, the same thing, you'll have to move back out, get in and try and hammer the last stretch. Yeah, that's a good one. I like that.
I think it kind of heaps the legacy of the race, because it's always, get in at China Wall and then from there the race starts, and it'd be a different kind of you'd have to use it just adds another dimension, and you miss that sort of headwind, which is almost unfoilable unless you have a wave, to a little bit of flat water. Like you sort of get out of the wind line, then you start and it rebuilds, I guess, the bumps, and then you have everyone does the Hawaii Kai run. They don't do sandies no one finishes at Hawaii Kai. It's a shitty finish because of wind. But if you start at the run that everyone does and finish in I guess in the city, you'd be pretty special, I reckon. But it's not our decision.
Yeah, exactly.
yeah. And whatever is decided, I think will be, as you said, Edo, like we're all going to adapt to it and do all the things we need to be ready for it. And I think I'm looking forward to next year already. Oh, actually, sort of funny. Like, how do you guys feel after the race? Like, it was a bit of a build up. Now it's a bit like.
Yeah, I'm kind of bored. Like, I'm like, what do I work on now? Like, what am I gonna be thinking about?
Yeah.
What's next?
Yeah. Yeah.
I'm just looking forward to not going straight downwind. Like, it was so funny. Like, we're trying to fly back on Friday, and my girlfriend's like, "Oh yeah, we got to do some things in Sydney and all this," and I'm like, "We're driving straight down the coast. I'm going foiling on Sunday morning because all the boys will be around." I was just like I need to go prone, or like I'm still just psyched to foil, but I'm just like, I don't want to go straight downwind for a long time.
Yeah, I'm certainly keen to turn. It was actually there was a cliff that one of the filmers guys got in Maui to Molokai, and I think it was the last time I did turns. I saw that. There was like,
I was like, what?
Yeah, it was.
Dude, you were ripping around. I was listening Kai pump so hard. And Jimmy's just going, wow.
Yeah. That's because everyone had just gone past me, like I wasn't moving, and I'm like, oh, well, I'm not going to win this race. I'm just going to surf. And then I looked back and looking at the times, I'm like, oh, if I hadn't surfed for like that 5 minutes, like maybe I could have got Edo. But it was it was all too little, too late. It was pretty funny though. Yeah, that was. It was actually. I'll have to get Josh Koo on here too, because he was like. He's always the guy that does the most distance in a downwind run because he's just surfing so much. And he comes in at the end after we're comparing stats, and he's like, "Oh, how far did you go?" I'm like, "Oh, like 53 Ks." And he goes, "Oh, I got 59." He's done an extra. And Perth was complaining about like 57, and then Josh is like, "Oh, what? And you did the bad line?" It's like, "I did a good line and did 59." Just zigging and zagging the whole way.
Huey's line choice for anything. I've done a run. The first time I ever did a run with him, he went like 5 Ks offshore, past, and he's like, I was like, "Dude, what are you doing?" He's like, "I didn't know where I was going." I was like, "So why'd you go solo out there? Like, why didn't you just follow us in?"
Yeah.
He's I don't know what he does, but he's just good fun to have on a run. I always enjoy doing runs with Josh, and he rips. Like, he's doing some such good turns now. Like, everyone leveled up on this trip. Like, to see how everyone's progression. Like, everyone's just pushing it to that next level, and that's what's been really cool. And I think just having everyone around, like, having a few years now of like, you kind of knew who was already good at downwinding, who's doing the long runs, and who's kind of capable, but speeds were pretty unknown. But all these guys we've been chatting, like most of us, we all arrived together, and I was talking about it with a few the other day, but like it's sort of hard to switch into that mindset. Like, me and Simeon were just sitting on the start line of M2O, just being like, dude, like, all these guys that we've been chatting with, we're all just sitting here now ready for a race. And it's kind of hard to be like, we've been frothing on each other's stuff and stoking each other up. But like, all of a sudden it's like, I got to switch into like a competitive mindset, which was kind of hard. Like that once we got out, when Andrew was like, "Yeah, dude, we made it." We were like, we'll froth them. Then all of a sudden I was like, "Shit, no, we're in a race. Okay, we go." Like, so it's, I mean, it's been just so cool having all the crew together. Everyone's around in the one place at one time. Like, the vibe and just the energy coming from everyone's just been so good. But it's also been so secretive. Everyone's like, guys are waiting at the harbour. They'll keep their foils in the water. They'll wait till everyone else leaves. Then they'll quickly take theirs up. Or like, guys are taking rashies off, tying it around foils. I slack up on Kane on one, and he sprinted up the beach away from me to go put covers on. And I mean, it's just been all good fun, and it's it's been an epic time.
It's all been good stories. Actually, I think the Armstrong guys are probably the most secretive, followed by Kane.
Yeah,
mate. I feel so bad. Like, I even said it to Andrew. It was the first thing I said. I'm like, we did a run, and he came behind me like, "I'm sorry, dude. I got to wait." I was like, and that's why they don't tell me, because they know I'll just be like, it's it's like 600. It's this. I'm like, sick. I'm like, and they just like not telling me, dude. And I was like, yeah, fair. Like,
Yeah.
I'll paddle it and kind of work out, like make it smaller or bigger. But that was about it. They just don't tell me, which is fair.
It was funny because obviously Ben and Marcus were there and we're doing the code stuff and we've got these foils that aren't released yet, but we don't have a downwind wing already. So it's a bit of a different situation to, Axis and Armstrong, whereas where you guys have, like, there's the ART series and there's the high aspect from Armstrong. And so I was like, sort of, we're seeing, the Armstrong guys especially, and we're like, oh, should we not be like showing our foils? Mark's just like, oh man, we don't have anything else that's a downwind wing. So he's like, I'm not taking covers with me or anything like that. And so he's like, like, whatever, just show them. But it's like, it's obviously, it's for the shops. That's why brands do that. Like for Armstrong, for them, for their new foil that's not released yet to be plastered over everything. I don't think it's so much people copying it. It's more that shops already have stock of stuff, and it sort of devalues their stock, which is which is, I guess, the biggest thing. And like the ART Pro has probably been the worst kept secret Axis. The second worst kept secret after
second behind the Spitfire.
I spoke to Adrian. I'm like, dude, how have you not released the ART Pro? Like, it was pretty much ready when I was still with you guys. And he's like, oh, we changed a few things, and yeah, fair enough. But they're obviously, pretty cool to see the stuff you guys are riding, and everyone to be there. And it was pretty, like, there was a few runs where we were all sort of, riding together. But to me, it really felt like race day was when we really tested out, the speeds of the foils and there was actually one run in particular. It was like my second Molokai run, and Ben and I were in the water, and Kai backed his truck down and got his board out and just sort of was starting to paddle out. And I thought, cool, we'll be able to do a run with Kai. And so I'm paddling out in Molokai, and all of a sudden I hear this. And it's him paddling up and it's flat and just sort of flies faster. So I'm like, oh, what a dog. I was like, I'm going to do a run with him. So I tried to paddle up, and I was like in that sort of weird zone where it's like the water coming in and the backwash, and I couldn't get up. And I sort of paddled out a bit further and got up. And I remember saying, I think it was with Notich. And I was like, what do you reckon? Should I go? He's like, yeah, go. So I was like trying to see if my foil was on pace with the foil that Kai was using. And he was like so far in the distance, a little dot, but I like kept him as a little dot the whole run. I'm like, oh yeah, I'm on the pace. It was kind of funny, but it was like cool. Like, at the beginning of the month over there, I was like, I wonder if our foils are fast enough. Like, because no one knew. It was all this sort of unknown as to who was riding the quickest stuff. And I think at the end of the day, it was like I said before, it was close. It was all closer than we thought. There was no standout foil. There was just standout riders. To be honest, like, I think we all sort of got the most out of the foils, and we're all within, like, was it 2 minutes for M2O, and every other race was Paddler was 20 seconds, and Maui to Molokai was pretty much, it was a minute or something as well. So it was, as I said before, becoming a sport, which is exciting.
For sure.
Totally.
Yeah. Well, I think we're coming up to 2.5 hours. So thanks, everyone.
Wow, that's crazy.
I do want to do another one with you, Edo, because we've done one with Oskar before, but we'll get you on again, Edo, because I want to sort of hear more about how you've gotten to the level that you're at. Because my stepmom was freaking out. She's like, he's from Hong Kong. He's like from Italy, and he moved to Hong Kong, and now he's in Oahu. I think she said to you at the awards night, she was like, I really wanted to meet you. She was like, She was fangirling. But she was like, all these stories, and like, Oskar, I know how you got started, but I want to hear how Edo did. But we'll do that another time, because it's been a while on this one. But do you guys want to finish with something, and like it's closing words, maybe one from each of you? Let Oskar go first, so Edo can get his thoughts together.
I just wanted to, just thanks to everyone. It's been, I think the foil community is what kind of makes it what it is, and doesn't matter, like, you show up at Molokai run, it doesn't matter if it's the best foiler around, if Kane and Andrew are there paddling out, or Kai, or if it's just like any of the local boys, like, everyone's welcoming. Everyone will drive to the bottom and someone will give you a lift back up. Like, the community around it has been probably one of the best parts of this whole journey. And I mean, it's the same, like, all these boys that, a lot of these guys they're the reason I got into downwinding. And so to be having battles with them and to be chatting after with them and just catching up with them has been kind of the best part of it. So yeah, just thanks to the whole community really, and just keep the Stoke going, and kind of looking forward to sharing a bit more and not being so secretive about everything. Just wanting to just go back to geeking out on gear and just enjoying it. So yeah. Thanks to everyone.
Yeah. Thanks, Oskar. Edo?
Yeah. Same. Just a big thank you. You know, the whole Foil community is so supportive, and I think we all have a very strong bond because we know the struggle that goes with foiling. It's a pretty steep learning curve, and now that we're all here downwinding and enjoying it together, it's a really special moment. And yeah, I'm just really happy the level that it's getting at, where it's not so much about equipment, but we're all just pushing it. And yeah, it's just going to get better from here. So I'm excited for next year.
Yeah, awesome. Well said, both you guys. I couldn't agree more. And we'll have to try to get a few crew over to WA. I know, Oskar, you missed it last time by a little bit, but that's sort of, as soon as I got home, I'm like, I got to plan my WA trip, because there's a race called the West Coast Downwinder, which last year had a really bad, it was just, the wind was good, but the weed was shocking. So it was like foiling through, like it was really bad seagrass. But it'd be cool to get some of the Hawaii crew over to WA, and hopefully the conditions turn on. And it's there's a few good races down there for sure. And I guess I'll keep everyone updated as best I can for that, and try to hype it up, because I remember Josh Koo actually hit me up about this, or probably this time in June, like early June, was like, dude, you got to hype up like Hawaii season, like downwind month. And I'm like, yeah, that's a good call. So he sort of got me going with the podcast again, and stoked I did, because more discussions like this and gets more people excited about it. So yeah, thanks you guys for your time today, and thanks for the good times over in Hawaii. It was a hell time.
Yeah.
Thank you, boys.
Yeah, appreciate it. And good battle. That was an epic crossing, an epic month just of racing. It was just good times.
Yeah. Awesome. Yeah, it was a bloody good battle.
Yeah.
For you it was. I fucking lost it.
Wow, thanks, boys. Good one. Cheers.
You.